Hey.
Looks like we got an all-star cast here. I like it.
Looks like it, right?
Pure native power.
I've got an idea.
You guys can hear me, right?
Not this one.
Huh.
Okay. Are we good now? Can you all hear me on time?
Huh. Who's all here?
Can hear
Who's all in the chat?
Right now, I am searching for who is exactly on the chat. Let me see here.
Your
Looks like we got. Let me double check. Well, right now, like everyone that's on, maybe we should like go over our introductions real quick. First of all, like thank you guys all for being here. First, we got new Amauta.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. Juan Sierra. How's it going, bro? Juan Taloa. What's going on? Alexander WoundedSide.
Huh.
And the guy that I don't know yet, and I feel that I should know. And we just have LakotaGuy. So if maybe, did you want to just go by LakotaGuy? Or maybe if his mute might be on.
What was that again? Sorry.
Oh, no. So, I said, should we all just go by LakotaGuy?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, Kola. Duka Anita.
Oh, Kola. I'm bet to watch day.
Happy watch that. Duka Anita.
Uh-huh.
Where are you from?
Oh, Rosebud Sioux Tribe. Alexander, right? We know each other on Facebook, brother.
You kind of cracked up there. Kola, I'm not catching your name.
Oh, Taco Nichiapiwo.
Wait, no. Alex WoundedSide, Amauta, Chanish, Taco Enichabe. What's your name?
Oh, LakotaGuy, Amauta, Emachiapilo.
Slowai Ash.
Louis Wambly Wakiya, Emachiapilo.
Oha.
St. Francis, Amauta, Dakota Lakoche, Amauta.
Wana Chixia Cha. Mish nach Chi Prince del Watina. Ogol Mawecha Cha. Oyuchpe in Kiaksa. Tioshpe Nupilenas Amauta. Ash. Kiaksa Trokahea. Amauta.
Ohan. Maina. What Mato Watakpe Tioshpaye?
Huh.
Marcus, you want to get started?
You're from Charging Bears, Tioshpai?
Ohan.
Yeah, we'll just letting you guys talk it out for a little bit. Hey, once again, welcome. Thank you for all that's watching right now. I really appreciate your time. To the people that are viewing and those that subscribe, thank you so much for everything that you've done and your support. We greatly appreciate it. Today is a very night. It's a really important night because I've never had it live with so many people on at the same time, and bringing all these great minds together. And I believe there's more people that will be on as well. And I think we just really wanted to cover some current events that are going on right now in the world, specifically for those indigenous tribes. The news that I've heard from Canada and the United States all the way down to Patagonia and South America. And just solutions that we can think of as indigenous people to better help those that are more in need. Things that I've learned in Paraguay and Brazil from my friends with agribusiness and those that are losing land, the poor children that lost their lives long ago from the boarding schools, and a lot of other issues and current events going on in the United States that also have effect on us as well. So without further ado, let's begin. So before we started, though, I wanted to ask LakotaGuy your thoughts. Now, if I am not correct, you had a video recently with Clear Bear. It was pretty good from what I saw. So Very nice.
Yeah, for sure.
I imagine you probably had some thoughts and perspectives on, Southern Indigenous people. The kind of the points that Juan and I and others here like to point out is I think the flawed narrative, I believe, on like who is like a mestizo and a Latino, Hispanic person, and those that, for us that want to say that we're Indigenous and Native, there's a lot of people, you have gatekeepers and others that aren't even Native that like to say, no, you cannot be Hispanic or Native because of, like I've said this before, XYZ. And then you've got others from, Central and South America that will say, no, like tribes will never accept you. And just a lot of disrespectful things, unfortunately. Even me, and it's crazy because me and others that I've known originally went through like the Hispanic label and like saying like, no, like not Indigenous, but like the more I wake up and the more books that I read and the just videos that I've watched and documentaries, it makes sense now to say that, I'm Indigenous, but there's obviously a lot of problems right now, for Indigenous people and those that are like when we talk to people maybe that would say, well, yeah, but maybe we are Indigenous. They would be like, no, I don't want to be that because they're taught. And I'm talking about those south of the U.S. border. Like, I can't possibly be Indigenous because they're taught to believe that's a negative word, or that they have no interest in being a part of that. I think it's taught by parents, by school system, by the media. You have Indigenous people in these types of roles, which aren't in movies, as I should say, or barely in any movies or media at all. And I think we could go into further detail about like why that is. But I was just curious on your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me here and allowing me to take the space. I know you didn't need to invite us. If someone Alexander, you might want to mute your mic, brother. It's a little loud. It's a little loud, brother.
Hiyanka.
But I just in my Lakota protocol, we have a greeting that we're bound to give. So I just want to quickly give that. Haumatakiapi na sichango Lakota hemecha and mi ma ina mato watakpe tioshbae mi oyate ki hisapaki lile wakan yuha chante washte nape chayuzape Louis Wambly Wakinya e machapilo. Basically what that greeting says is, I am from the Burnt Thigh Nation of the Great Sioux Confederacy, the Ochedeshokoan, and I greet you with a good heart and a warm handshake, and I greet you in peace. I also wanted to let you know what my name was and where my mom comes from, which is the Charging Bear family of the Lakota. So thank you again for inviting me on here, and I really appreciate it. We talk about, Indigenous identity. We're dealing with colonization, and we have to understand the language of colonization is different among different ways that we were colonized. Among the British in the United States, it was the Dutch, it was the Spanish, it was the British, and it was the French, right? In Mexico, Central South America, it was a little bit different. So, the identity of who we are today in 2021 has a lot to do with that type of colonization. In our Mesoamerican communities, Central and South American, a lot of colonization had to do with a reverse of an identity, a hijacking of identity, so to speak, of saying that, hey, we're going to, because the encomienda and the caste system and all these perpetual oppression type of, colonization tactics, they put them in we deal with a settler colonial construct of colorism. Right, and you see it on TikTok, you see on social media, people who are light-skinned, they get, stuff for saying, oh, you don't look Indian, and you got the dark-skinned natives like myself, it's like, oh, well, you guys are too Indian or whatever. It's like this weird thing with settler colonial constructs, and the same thing with our Mesoamerican brothers and sisters. They're fighting things like encomienda, caste system, and identity erasure. And this identity erasure didn't have anything like reservations or nation and nation agreements like United States and First Nations communities. So when we talk about how we decolonize and reconnect, the experience of someone in the United States and First Nations communities is going to be a lot different than someone in Mesoamerica, Central and South America, considering there's already infrastructure for that. And those people in those areas don't really have that type of infrastructure. And I've talked to so many people, and people in the Mesoamerican community, and there's things like improving the race, which is you marry someone white, well, that gives you better opportunities, that gives you an opportunity for your kids in the future. Also, Indio Ifeo, this idea of a beauty standard that's Eurocentric. So it also prevents people from reconnecting, because the whole identity of being Indio, being indigenous, is an ugly thing, and that's perpetrated by telenovelas, and all these other things on TV that literally perpetuate a Eurocentric, beauty standard. So, I believe in the prophecy of the eagle and the condor and the quetzal, all of us together in unity. We're dealing with rapid colonization in 2021, brothers. And the reason why we're dealing with it is because the colonizers are in a fervent pattern of taking. You have Nestle buying aquifers down in South America. You have Nestle buying aquifers in First Nations communities. You have Bolsonaro, who is the president of Brazil, committing acts of literal murderous acts against indigenous leaders in the Amazon, and those leader communities are under threat constantly by his administration. You have the Maduro, who has scapegoated himself with the indigenous communities, allowing Colombian and cartel interests to terrorize indigenous people in Venezuela. You have Colombian right now with their corrupt political system, and people going in the streets. And even in Cuba, we're seeing in Cuba now that people are rising in the streets demanding, libertad, a sense of freedom. So I'm in unity of that. And as indigenous people, and I'm talking to our northern brothers and sisters here, we have to have this mentality that we're all in this together, that whatever happens in the rainforest happens to me. Whatever happens to our Quechuan brothers and sisters that are being exploited by these industries down there with labor practices, what happens to our ICE detention centers happens to me. That's Lakota children, as far as I'm concerned. That is my mentality, brothers.
Is this a question? Is this an open for? Are we just sort of going back and forth, or?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I wanted Marcus, if you guys had anything. That's just what I was thinking of answering your question.
Were you gonna say something, Alexander?
Troca bringt. Ha met daar kun je bij otra opi en maatje hebben. Iska. Chanta was de na pet use up cha. A pet dugle. Lila was tek ta ketchamina. Inawa eki na pe was den we ash. Washijukilana Dolores Big Boy et Giabna. Ate wayaki dohani ata wayashnicha. Trachanjakis lo wayashnina. Mish malakota taganisa. Malakota trokahea. Na. Tioshbai num emata. Kiyaksa trokahea emata hananaku o yuchpe. Ish ea Amauta hanelo. Oshpaye lenaus Amauta hanwakha. Yoshpaye mithawa matho yatecha. Iska. Homak shichila kunhehan inawayekin. Ichpe maya cha itokara Atlanta, Georgia ekta imacha recha hasapa yateki. Wichaha imacha reash. Wania duma wikjemana num sam num konheha oglatra makroche waglihunina la colia unspenichena la colwichochan kilena unspemichia wachincha la waki wakilaki omakielo. Iska. Itoka rakia Amazon rainforest da kushichicha oki prabna. Hechia da oyate na lila kakija bichi. Oshichu oyate kin. Chante wanicha nanaku nari wanicha nanaku Maka trawo prekilana okap ni rapshni. Chahe chel umpina. Ehani milahaska kilana hechechji umpi. Nanaku lehan oyate ki makasi domania lila kakijapslen. Iska watohash na takuota okaki papi kena iuha oyate ki dakwe chunkumpi unkoki hipik so unyapshni. Na wambli sapa voa bleza kin I ewakie. Cha.
Washichiyapi Wagluhe. I don't think anyone understands Lakota besides me and you, brother. We may want to resort to English for our, yeah.
I'll interpret. Basically what I said was I said hello my relatives, I greet you with a warm I shake your hand with a warm heart, with a good heart. I explained to you that my mother was known as Good Hands Woman, although the Washichis called her Dolores Big Boy, that I come from two Oshpaye, the Kiaksa and the Oyuchbe, and then my Tioshpaye are the Bear people. I explained that when I was a baby, my mother gave me up, and so I lived down south in Atlanta, Georgia, amongst Hasapa people. I did not like it, and when I was 22, I returned to the land of my people. I returned to Oglala country. I said that I wanted to understand Lakota ways and learn my language, so I asked my grandfather and he helped me. I then said that, you know, what's going on in the South, you know, the people are seriously suffering down there. I said, I recognize the eagle and condor understanding. I said, but these days, so much stuff is happening, but people don't know what we can do. Yeah, I said, the long knives have no heart, they have no spirit, and that's why they do the things that's why they're this way. That's essentially what I was saying. I spoke in Lakota first rather than speaking in English because so often do we do this thing where we introduce ourselves in Lakota and immediately switch to English. We put, to be honest, it's like Lakoliapi Washitu Api Lazata Eunganaka. We put our Lakota language behind the English language. It's like Lakoliapi Nachmala Eunganaka. It's like we hide our language. You know, and a lot of younger Lakota don't hear anyone under the age of 50 or 60 speaking Lakota commonly. They're surrounded by English. And this is a part of the taking back who we are aspect of things, is we as Lakota, and regardless of what tribe you come from, it's important to we reach back and each your language and get your language because, that contains our worldview. Amongst the Lakota, we have a concept that you are a Toka, you are an enemy until proven otherwise if you are not Lakota or of our allied people. If you are not Ocheti Shakoni or of our allied people, you are a Toka, and we applied that to everyone around us. But we also have stories of our relatives going into the South. In fact, when we got the bow, it is said we were so far south, the birds didn't speak Lakota anymore, and the people couldn't go any further south because they were surrounded by water. It was in that location we got the bow. If you look at the word Teotihuacan in the Nahuatl language, it means basically like house of the gods. But yet Teotihuacan in Lakota means the dwelling inside. He dwells inside of it sacredly. Teotihuacan. He dwells inside of it, and he dwells inside of it sacred. He lives inside of the house sacredly, basically is what it means. See? Or it is sacred. He is dwelling inside of the house. It is sacred. It's hard to explain direct translation, but that it carries the same connotation. See?
I remember it as dwell sacredly. Teotihuacan, dwell sacred in the place.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it's literally, that's.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
And that's something that we have to recognize. Is the sort without losing our individual identities, we need to recognize those connections. Lalawaiki Suarez at the time. My father's father came from Suarez. My father's mother came from Cuba. She was an Afro-Cuban, so to look at me, you'll see I have kinky hair like an African and slightly darker skin. As a result of which, some people will see me and say things like, oh, Hechi, Hechi Hasapa Najielo. Hasapa standing over there.
No, Lakota, Oyate, we are Lakota. Once you're hunked in or you're, a relative, it doesn't matter. Whether you be, European indigenous, Afro indigenous, you are equally Lakota. And that's the problem, is that we have settler colonial constructs of color that we need to break in all of our communities. This idea that, to be indigenous is to look a certain way. Yeah, we have an ethnicity. We have a phenotype. That's all these brothers here have a little bit of a phenotype, right? But at the same time, we have to also recognize that we're in 2021 and we have admixed relatives that we cannot say that you're not indigenous or you do not belong in our society. That's gatekeeping and closing the door.
But you also can't be 5 different things. Either you are Lakota or you're not.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's just pretending. That's pretendians at that point.
That I acknowledge. The reason that I acknowledge my statement that our people have to them down there, something. So we don't. A lot of people I've seen when I speak, because I don't believe in continued race mixing. I believe that we as Indian people should stay within our race, should strengthen our blood, and should continue moving forward as a people. I don't encourage people to mix races outside of our race. I get it. It's happened. I'm a product of it. I'm not happy about it, but it's what it is. And the thing is, we have an obligation to continue our that forward. I take pride in the fact when people look at me and can see a picture of my mom and say I look like her, or when people saw some of my ancestors, they can see commonalities in my face in spite of my kinky hair and darker skin. I take pride in the fact that my ancestors are still etched in my bones, and that's something I want my children and grandchildren to still have. you know.
The creator made you a certain way, though, and we can't discriminate against people that are mixed race or discriminate people that found love with people outside of our community. You know, that doesn't make them less indigenous. It doesn't
You're
make
right,
them
but
less.
a lot of the time in this day and age, people end up doing this thing where they tend to assume that because they're with a Washitu or Hasapa or something, they want to bring that person around and give that person some kind of rights to our ways. And when they push back, then they want to Yashicha the people and say we're somehow on the wrong. I am a part of where I Sundance, or I should say, well, fuck it, people know anyway. Where I Sundance, there's a big sign that there's no white people allowed. That there are no non-Indians allowed on the grounds. Period. And that's actually people have left our Sundance because they didn't like the fact that their Wishichu spouse or their Hasapa spouse wasn't allowed on the grounds. But they don't understand. We are attached to a law greater than anything that these people's sensitivities and feelings can.
But who's to say they're not indigenous? Okichi, you're married in, right? That means you're Lakota. You're part of our community. You're part of that Tiwahe. You're part of that Tioshbaye. You know, and when we discriminate based on color or tell someone they can't be a part of Sundance, we're literally erasing our own people, brother. This is an issue we have in Lakota country, brother. We have an issue with erasing our own people because they don't fit a phenotype, because they don't fit a way of looking. We can't do that. We have brothers that are Afro-Indigenous. We have brothers that are European Indigenous. We have people that are Mesoamerican Lakota. We can't discriminate,
I think
brother.
You need to understand, I'm not talking about them. I've been literally, when I was talking to one of my relatives, I asked him years later what he thought of me when I first talked to him, and he goes, I was wondering who the Puerto Rican was talking to me in Lakota. I've been mistaken for Cuban, for Puerto Rican, for Somalian, for a lot of things. So I get, but what I'm saying, if you have Indian blood, you are welcome. If you are full-blood non-Indian, you are not permitted to be involved. It's that simple.
Because in a perspective from the South that I'd like, if you don't mind me interjecting.
Yeah, please.
Just to give a quick introduction. Imana Kazangichek, Wagesni, Panasni, Nyogaksuti Arnold, Nyogaksuti Instagrampi, New Amauta, Moso Kamauta, Kaijimanakuiga, Sumak. I said hello and how are you all, my siblings, my relatives. My name is Arnold. On Instagram, my name is New Amauta. New Amauta meaning a new philosopher or new a scholar, intellectual, wise person in the Quechua language. And I said that this conversation is beautiful. So coming from myself, my family being my mom comes from La Paz, Chuquiapu Manta, and my dad comes from Cochabamba Manta. There's a particular view of how mixed people, how quote mixed people are. Everyone knows what mestizaje is, but to give a little introduction, it's the idea that cultural and racial mixing in Latin America created a new type of racial group, one that is neither European nor indigenous, and that culture is the culture that will not only push Latin America forward as the authentic national and racial group, but is the one that brings Latin America its own uniqueness, one that had never existed before. However, when you see a lot of indigenous peoples in Latin America, for someone from the north, if they were to come to Bolivia, they would be amazed at how 99% of the country looks indigenous. How 99% of the country is indigenous. It probably closer to like 95, but you would think that Bolivia or countries all across Latin America are indigenous. But there's the difference between the consciousness and the phenotype. There's the difference between the quote biology and the worldview and mindset that each person has. Because mestizaje is not, as it is in the 20th and 21st century, is much more of a cultural label than it is a biological one. I could be considered a mestizo, but if I walked around Lakota country or I walked around like the Navajo Nation, they'd probably think, hey, like which nation did you come from? Or if I speak, but once I speak Spanish, there's the idea that you're not indigenous anymore. That being brown but speaking Spanish is tied to mestizaje. There already you see that being the cultural signifier of Spanish drags me into mestizaje. If you go into Latin America, there are people who speak only who will speak indigenous languages in Spanish, but the moment they give up their indigenous languages, they give up their indigenous clothing, they renounce their community, they try to hide it away like it's some dark past behind them, they're considered mestizos. Even though they're indigenous, they might speak Quechua. Like my father, he speaks Quechua, he speaks Spanish, he grew up bilingual. My grandmother, she speaks only Quechua, she barely speaks any Spanish. Were someone to ask what culture I am, they'd say Bolivian. Oh yeah, Latino. And yeah, he speaks Spanish, so he's a Latino. But if I never learned Quechua, it wouldn't take away from my Latino-ness. But if I know Quechua, that adds something that is the indigenous side that is hidden away behind the Latino label, behind the mestizo label. And it is a lot of the consciousness. Once you have indigenous peoples who give up that culture, you have a mestizo, even if they're 100% indigenous. And there's a similar process in North America. You'll have indigenous peoples. The whole process of the residential school system was to de-Indianize the Indian, to make them American, while to make them American in their mind while being indigenous on the outside. And in the same way, and I always tell this to everyone, if you want to see the process of the residential schools as the completed process of the residential schools, just go down to a city in Latin America and talk to someone who looks as brown as you and ask them, hey, are you Indian? Are you indigenous? And they'll curse you out. They'll say, I'll never be something so disgusting. Nunca seré algo tan feo. Nunca era algo tan feo, they'll say. And mestizaje is the cultural completion of that cultural assimilation of the residential schools. And I think it's important that that when we look at the at people who are like mixed, it's important to understand what type of mentality do they have. Do they see themselves as someone united with the indigenous cause, with indigenous peoples, someone connecting with the culture, or are they someone who only view their indigenous side as a type of token, or like a sticker, something they just flash to make people think they're cool or something, but then in their actions they'll push everything indigenous aside. It's secondary to them. And I think that's the important thing we have to recognize. And I think we see it in Latin America, where it's definitely about your culture. And I think North America, there's a similar aspect too now. I think the conversation's since the conversation's been happening in Latin America for 500 years rather than 200 years for most native nations, I think it's lagging a bit. But but it's catching up. The problems that happen in Latin America are starting to happen in native nations across the US and Canada.
Everything that you... Oh, sorry.
No, absolutely. I just... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alexander. Go ahead.
I was just saying that, and that's what I'm ultimately saying. When I say non-Indian, that's exactly what I mean. I don't mean an Indian person who just happens to have European blood or whatever. I have relatives that, if they wanted to, could probably pass for white, but that's because they pulled some of the Washichu genetics way back in their bloodline somewhere. There's a word we use up here, Ieska, which it technically means interpreter, but we use it for half-breeds, and it's usually people that are significantly white-blooded. And my sister was going around once. Now, both of her parents are Lakota, but her dad was a Ieska guy. Her mom, had some Washichu blood in her, but anyway, so she kind of came out light complected. And someone goes, "Oh, I could tell you were Ieska by the way you talk." The woman didn't mean it as a negative. She was saying, "I could tell you were Lakota." My sister looks at her and goes, "I ain't no Ieska," because to her, she's simply Lakota. That's it. That's all. And that's the same thing. And that's what I'm ultimately saying. In this day and age, we as Indian people, as Lakotas, as Quechua, as whatever, we you know, we are on a battlefield, and we're on a battlefield to reclaim who we are as peoples. We are on a battlefield to reclaim our identities. We are on a complete and utter battlefield, because the facts are Hoka oyate ki lana iyuha unkte chimpi. These Toka, they want to kill us. They want us gone. Either they want us to become Milahanska, they want us to Unglutokchab, turn ourselves into long knives, into Americans, or they want us to just go away. And the problem is, some people don't want to take the stances necessary to see us still be here. And here's the thing. Race mixing was one of the key things used in the South to breed our people into extinction. I'm not saying that a Lakota with white blood is less Lakota than anyone else, but that Lakota with white blood does have a choice. Are you Lakota or are you not? I had a choice. I could have stayed away from my people upon finding out who I was, because I was adopted out, like I explained in my introduction. But I didn't. I came back and have been here and have been living amongst my people for pretty much all of my adult years. And because this is where I am. Is it easy all the time? No. Do I have issues sometimes? Yes. In my chante, do I know that I made the right decision? Yes. Because let me at this is me. And that's the thing. You know, people get upset because I don't let them call me Moreno or Hasapa, which those two words, Moreno es Hasapa. Hasapa es Moreno, you know, like that. They're the same thing. And I don't allow people to call me that because I don't care that I have curly hair or that my skin's a bit darker. I know who and what I am. And it's that simple. And I think that's the mentality we need to go back to. But now you've got people who will cut down our own people. Oh, you're like, you know, saying this or that. You know, I've been told by people that I'm, you know, I mean, it's ridiculous. And because there's so much mixing with white people and you have so many like complected Indians, it's become more acceptable. And people don't really say anything. Someone like me, I get people, oh, you should embrace your African side. No, I'm good. No, thank you. Oh, but you're part African. I mean, I have their blood, but are you going to tell that guy with the last name LeBeau over there that he's part French and tell him he should be speaking French and being a French guy? No. Then why are you extending that same discourtesy to me? You know?
What I've noticed a lot is a lot of the native nations. You'll see different native nations across the north and the south that are very mixed. You'll see the Ramapo Lenape, who aren't too far away from the land I'm on, which is Lenapoking, the land of the Lenape people on the eastern coast of the U.S. They're very mixed. There's a story that there were indigenous the Muncie Lenapes, the ones who were inhabiting New York City, the south part of New York, upstate New York, the eastern side of New Jersey. To escape the colonists, ran into the Ramapo Mountains, and during a shipment, a night when there was a shipment of African slaves, many of them were African sexual slaves that were being imported in by the colonists, the women who were being stolen away. There was a shipwreck, and then many of these women escaped into the mountains, and they were brought in by the Ramapo Lenape. So, and you'll see, and then there was the gradual mixture between the colonists, between Lenape and these black women, these African women, and many of the Ramapo Lenape now are very mixed. Many of them look black, but they will say they're Ramapo Lenape. They are members of the nation, and they view themselves as indigenous. And I think And I think Alexander's point is very true here. That you can't deny someone's indigeneity based on the way they look, nor based on the biology that you see before you. What I would also say is Or also you would see like nations like the Garifuna in Honduras across like Central America, predominant in like Honduras. They also mixed in with a lot of Africans, with a lot of like African freed slaves on the eastern coast of Honduras, of El Salvador, because of their proximity to the Caribbean. But they also view themselves. Sometimes they view themselves as indigenous. Sometimes they view themselves as black. Many of the times they view themselves as both. And I think it's important that we recognize how mixed peoples, what we would consider mixed peoples, um, are the ones who are also indigenous. But I will one other thing actually. It's common to think that mestizaje is a Latin American process, but in Canada, for a lot of folks from Latin America, let me tell you, in Canada you have métissage, which is the French word for mestizaje, and that's how you get the Métis people in Canada. Many of them consider themselves indigenous. They have a long history of indigenous resistance. In 1885, they had I believe it's the Red River Uprising. If someone could correct me there, but Louis Riel, he was a French, he was a mixed, I believe, Cree and Frenchman who had risen up his Métis people to go against the onslaught of colonists coming in from the east. That is that is a decolonial version of mestizaje, of like being mixed, where it doesn't destroy the Indian inside you, but brings in new cultural factors that you use for new indigenous nations. But then you'll have other ones, like surprisingly in the U.S. there was also plans for mestizaje. In different speeches by some of the founding fathers, including Thomas Jefferson, I believe in 1806 or 1803, if someone could look that up. He speaks to a delegation from 6 nations across, I believe, six indigenous nations, either in the South or in the Midwest, and he tells them, brothers and sisters, we need to unite between white and indigenous peoples. We need to mix our blood so that we can have a real United States, quote unquote. Two problems with that. One, Jefferson's doing that. Jefferson talks about that as a way to remove the what is known like now in like indigenous studies as settler anxiety. The idea that settler peoples are always on the land and they never are always on the land, fearful that indigenous peoples will take it back. But once you have indigenous blood with a white mindset, then you're able to claim that this is your land. The same way mestizos claim the lands of Latin America now, with by saying we're indigenous, where we have ties to the land, but your culture, your indigenous culture, that's backwards. That's the past. Become the mestizo. In a similar fashion, Jefferson was making the same play. Indigenous peoples, we need to mix with indigenous people so we have claims to the land, but that white American culture becomes a dominant hegemonic culture. And the other problem is that it never actually came to fruition. The colonists, because of the culture that they developed from the pilgrim, like the very ethnic enclaves of pilgrims, and of the wars that many of the colonists wanted, they wanted more land than they wanted land more than they wanted to enslave native peoples, because they viewed that indigenous peoples just abhorrent to Christianity. And also they brought many colonists had women, had tools, had more funding from the English government. So they didn't need indigenous peoples on their lands. They just needed them out. So there was no, so even after the U.S. was created, there was no mixture, even though that was in the minds of more of the quote enlightened founding fathers. But we can see how there are different versions of mestizaje, and the ones that we consider colonial are the ones where they consider themselves mestizo with a white culture, whereas you have the Métis, the Garifuna, the Ramapo-Lenape, who are indigenous, regardless of their mixture, but also they brought in many of the aspects of those other cultures into their own, and we shouldn't ever disregard that. Before I move on, I want to Juan Sierra, do you want to say anything? It's been a long time before you got to mention anything.
I kind of wanted to just say that typically when we talk about mestizaje, there's other mixtures like Arabic blood, the Basques. Just kind of gets set aside. It's just always the emphasis on Spaniard and Indigenous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
something
I
that was,
hardly
kind of weird.
ever see anybody bring up the fact that we have like, African American DNA. So we can't even technically be mestizos under the caste system. But I don't see anybody bring that up. It's always goes back to Spanish and Indigenous. It's kind of stupid.
I think even then, like you'll notice many of the there are actual Europeans who like Basques. They're like the Basques, the Catalans who came to who went to lands like Argentina. You have the Welsh, you have Scottish folks who are colonized in Europe because they've been colonized by like the English. In the case of the Irish, the Welsh, and the Scottish, the Basque and the Catalans have been colonized by the Spaniards, by the Castilians. But many of them, once they come to the Americas, engage in settler colonial practices. I think and I think on some levels there is a type of process of when many white European settlers come to these lands, there's also the choice of, will you be a settler or will you join the colonial order? Will you continue with the traditions of supporting oppressed minorities and indigenous peoples on all continents, or will you oppress indigenous peoples and fall into whiteness? And I think because there are like nationalist and separatist movements in Europe, which I think indigenous peoples should support if they support us back. I think there should be a dual process there. Why should indigenous people support, let's say, the Scottish independence movement, if they won't recognize on some levels that indigenous peoples deserve their own autonomy, if at least in the U.S., at least as part of a separate system that we develop within the U.S. legal and political framework, or even independence. But I prefer the first one, where we look for autonomy and good government within between governments. There is a process called plurinationality in Latin America. It's the wave of like Latin American movements now. In Bolivia you have it. Bolivia evolved from a republic with one culture, the mestizo culture, into a plurinational state, a multinational state. Pluri and multi are basically the same. So there are 35, I believe 33 recognized indigenous nationalities. They're equal to the mestizos, and they're recognized as separate peoples with their own separate legal and with their own autonomous legal systems. In Chile, you have the Elisa Loncon, who is a Mapuche leader, a Mapuche female leader, who is now heading the drafting of the new constitution in Chile that will make Chile move from a republic to a plurinational state. And you have a similar process that's possible in Peru too, with the new president Pedro Castillo. And there was even a process attempted in Mexico with the Zapatistas and the San Andres Accords in 1996. There's a similar process that could be resurrected again in the U.S. Actually, I think for LakotaGuy and Alexander, this should be if you want to unite with the plurinational movements in Latin America, I think it's important to look at the 20 points by the American Indian movement. They're the 20 points in I believe their statement on broken treaties, where they say, we want to bring back the treaty system. We want to recognize the different treaties that were made, have the U.S. federal government recognize the land bases for all of the treaties that were done, but also recreate the treaty writing process, that it would be a nation-on-nation basis of negotiation, no longer where indigenous nations are separate from the U.S., but still a part of it. They're recognized as autonomous in the sense, and if there are any interactions or negotiations, it would be done as if it was done with another foreign nation through a treaty system. So, and I think that would be a proper way to do a plurinational in the U.S. Within the context and the history of the United States. And I think the Honor the Treaties movement, #HonorTheTreaties, should look into the history of Latin America, because we're already progressing farther. We have Bolivia, we have Chile now. We're going to Ecuador on some level is on that had some plurinational recognition. And for the folks in Central America, Panama, the Cuna people, the Quna, they actually have their own autonomous nation, which they've had since I believe 1927 or 1929, and it's been lucrative and successful on both sides. I think we have examples that we need to look towards, and I think the future. And I think on one level we could do this would be a constitutional amendment in the U.S. I think
I can speak on that, brother.
Would be possible in the U.S. without like absolute chaos, like it would like in Latin America. Latin America constitution changes all the time. In the U.S., it'd be a constitutional amendment. But you want to say LakotaGuy?
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to say, man, that's what you've been speaking is facts. And, you know, I think about the Sami people over there in Scandinavia. You know, that is an indigenous community. And exactly what you're saying, brother. Like, in order for us to be united, we need that reciprocation of activism, right? And that's exactly what you talked about. I mean, do we maintain activism with the Aboriginal community? I mean, have they shown reciprocation? You know, I know the Maori people have, shown that reciprocation. They actually went to Wounded Knee and did their haka, their traditional haka dance. That is unification. But I wanted to get a little of the weeds here since we're talking about this. I'm really enjoying this conversation, by the way, Marcus. Thank you so much again for inviting me here. This is nuance that needs to be spoken, and it's often not. But in the 1960s, there was a Red Power movement in the United States. And for those that don't know, I'm Lakota, and my grandfather was the AIM chapter chief in 1972-73 in the Black Hills. He was the first AIM chapter chief in the Black Hills. And he would speak with Russell Means, Dennis Banks, and all those. So we're pretty entwined with the American Indian movement. And in the 1960s, it was a Red Power movement, and they were spurred to understand, land back and activism. You know, you look at people like Nick Thielsen and the Indian Collective and the Land Back movement. That is all have been done by the Red Power in the 1960s. The problem is that we always run into the same thing. And in I want to say the 1970s, we approached the United Nations. And said, hey, we want to be repatriated. We want complete autonomy, complete sovereignty, and complete, nationhood. And they didn't go for it. So we kind of regathered our thoughts and came back and advocated and became an NGO. Granted, those people who are interested in NGOs, the UN's Economy and Social Council in the mid-1970s sponsored a conference, the 1977 UN Conference of the American Indians. And this was such a tremendous feat of accomplishment to have all of these nations. I think there was like 33 individual nations. There was 14 indigenous delegates to represent. There you go. Yeah, there. So you know what I'm talking about. Representation there.
Everyone buy this book, by the way. It's an amazing
awesome.
history of
it's a great book.
Indigenous activism.
Yep. And a lot of this footwork was done by the IITC, and I see someone in the comment section with the IITC logo. That's just phenomenal. I mean, a lot of the leadership was from the Mapuche people that were literally exiled from Chile under Pinochet. So we think about, indigenous unity, and what happened is this, for those that may not know, is that the United Nations and the Lakota people specifically, tried to push United Nations to condemn and what we call censor for genocide the United States for the 1948 Genocide Convention. In the 1948 Genocide Convention, if you look at any part of that all the way down, the United States met the description of genocide of what they did to indigenous people. So we pushed for that. We pushed again for autonomy and complete sovereignty. But again, look, being under occupied territory of the richest nation, and with that comes political power of the United Nations. So while asking them for complete autonomy, the United Nations, Canada, Australia, I believe New Zealand, if I'm not correct, all these countries, mind you, they have a horrible record of indigenous of exploiting indigenous people, did not vote for that. They did not come to the table. They did not want it. So the United Nations basically ruled that it was a domestic issue at that point. So, every time we get ahead and we unify together, North and South, we are met with colonial resistance, because they're using their wealth and their power for organizations like the United Nations, which is supposed to be autonomous by itself. It's supposed to be by itself. But time and time again, us indigenous people approach these quote unquote autonomous type of organization and demand autonomy, demand sovereignty, and we bring up like the 1948 genocide convention, and we say, hey, they met the description. Again, they can't do it. So again, my brother here, New Amauta, he's speaking so much truth, and I think the problem is that when we look at colonization in North America, we're talking about nation and nation domestic dependence. And was it 1836? The Marshall Trilogy, for those that may want to look that up, created domestic dependence of indigenous nations. So we claim to be sovereign of 574 federally recognized tribes, but at the same time we are domestic dependents of the United States. So we live under federal trust responsibility, and what that means is that we are up to the federal level of law enforcement and everything. So, in order to achieve, autonomy and complete sovereignty, we need to go through another level. And, I have no faith in the Democratic Party. I have no faith in the Republican Party. And I really despise the idea of us clinging to one of these parties and waiting for the white man to do something for us, because time and time again, they use our issues as cannon fodder when it comes every 4 years and need to be reelected. So we need to do something more than that. And I think, us, maybe approaching the UN again, being more coordinated in what we're doing, unless, getting all these fringe groups together and unify and demand these things. I am so excited about things that are happening in Chile, Bolivia, and all these other nations that are reclaiming their indigenous identity and allowing that political capital to be spent. And I'd like to see that more happening in North America, but we are facing a regime that is in current genocide of its indigenous people, and that's just sad. And I'm here for it, man. We are meant to be the indigenous people of 2021, man. I'm not meant to ride with crazy hordes and red climb. I'm meant to sit here with you, brothers and sisters, and go over these things.
Thank you, everybody. If I can add, thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I was late. Greetings, relatives. This is Citlali. I'm from Decolonized Mexican Excellence. And I wanted to speak to that. LakotaGuy, nice to meet you for the first time on here. I wanted to speak about the concept of genocide. In my research, Raphael Lemkin, the Polish Jew who actually coined the concept of genocide, he used the indigenous example of all of the Americas from north to south in his writings that were unpublished because he died at a very young age. He said, this is what I mean by genocide. What happened in Peru, this is genocide. What happened to the Aztec is genocide. So he gives examples of what our ancestors went through initially of the Spanish invasion and other European disruptions on our land. And to me, as an academic per se, I battle this in academia, right? Because we have historians, we have anthropologists, we have all of these social scientists who refuse to call our experience a genocide, an ongoing genocide. And I always push back and I say, if our experiences as Native peoples was good enough for Raphael Lemkin himself, who he himself is the one that is given that term, that coined the term genocide, why are we refusing to acknowledge and refusing to even define and describe the Native experience as genocide? And that is because as we are speaking here, we are still under genocide. Genocides that we're talking about, the Jewish Holocaust, other genocides of Rwanda and the Turkish, all these things, they could consider past tense. So it's very easy and very comfortable to talk about a genocide that came to an end. There was like a reconciliation. There's a UN representation for it doesn't happen again. But then our experience as Native folks, we are under occupation. We are under siege. We are still under attack. So the longer that we're occupied, they're trying to always find sophisticated tools, whether it's in intellectual properties, whether it's in the sciences, in all of these realms of institutions of knowledge. They're always trying to refine occupation. They're trying to refine what it means to be indigenous and what it means to be a settler. And they're trying to blurry those lines. And that's where we come the terms Hispanic, Latino, and all these other colonial concepts to keep us away from getting that ownership, that collective ownership of our lands as Native folks, and it's a very political, it's a very genocidal intention that has been perpetrated government by government, whether we're talking about Tierra del Fuego, the Dene, our brothers and sisters in Central and South America, all of these things happening. It's a very, where people can say it's not like they meet together and whatever in a meeting, but no, it's part of the fabric of white supremacy. It's part of the fabric of colonization. And so I think it's really important that all of us here, we continue to speak on this, we continue to call it out, because they're trying to normalize it. Oh, it's part of the human experience. Everyone gets colonized, everyone gets occupied. And I say, no, I refuse to be measure my humanity based on a European experience and a European, attribute of colonization, right? Columbus could have easily said, oh, I want spices. Thank you. Go back to Europe, create a little trademark over there. And it could have been so different, right? And also, too, it's like, why this whole issue of that we're the fusionism, right? That we as Native peoples, we're stagnant. We're always here. We never left our continent. How do they know that? How do they know that? What if our ancestors were the ones that went out and traded, but yet we didn't document that? Or maybe that hasn't been discovered yet. But it's like, again, this whole narrative that we're the stagnant folks, that we were just like the passive recipients of civilization, and everyone just came to us and we had nothing to give. So there's so much disruption. There's so much to unpack in all realms of knowledge and all institutions of knowledge. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. If anyone else wants to step in before I do, I don't want to overpower the conversation.
On your topic
I
of,
do want to say something, and I've been speaking to Marcus about this. It's like if we were able to speak our language, we would have had so much power, because then we would have had a different worldview. We would have had
That's right.
I don't know how to say this, but we would have a better. I don't know. We would have a better approach to where we would have gone from 1492.
Oh, absolutely.
By the way, on the topic of to the Wian who mentioned civilizations, and they say we were people try to push this narrative that we were a stagnant people. They might want to look up literally Cahokia. Cahokia was literally a city larger than London at the time, and there were several cities of comparable size, and they were all built by Siouan people, the ancestors of modern Oceti Shakoni people. And on that, and you mentioned different tools that they're using to implement colonization. Now they're using the Hasapa people to do it, the blacks to do it with their whole, they're the original people thing. I will never forget getting into a discussion with someone, and we were discussing the mounds in Minnesota, the land of many lakes, the land where literally our people come from, one of them anyway. And this guy says, oh, those are black people buried in those mounds. No. And I asked him, how do you figure that? He goes, because they worked copper. Indians didn't work copper. Is literally what he said. When I tried to explain to him that Dakota people have a connection to copper and use copper both on a secular level and on a spiritual level because it connects to one of our Wakampi, one of our sacred beings, he basically completely dismissed it. This idea that we are, like you said, stagnant, that our cultural intricacies are non-existent, whereas by the standards of traditional Lakota society, one of our grandpas from the 1700s or 1600s would look at the way Americans live and say they all have no etiquette, no manners, and they live as if they have no parents. Because they have no standards. They don't even know how to do something as simple as greeting one another. They have no wowachitanka, wonshila, wohitika, none of those things. And so I think, one thing that we have to stop doing, and I find myself doing it, is we'll say something, and even white people will always cite their sciences, their facts. We won't cite our own things. When we have winter counts that state horses were here long before the Washichu say they were, this Washichu man literally said, oh, our historians must have recorded it wrong. When we have records in our winter counts of receiving corn in 901, oh, that can't be right. They refuse to acknowledge the the societies that we had on this continent, and the intricacies of those societies, because like you said, they're using a myriad of different things to oppress us, and the sad thing is now they've even enlisted us to do it ourselves. The Indian Adoption Project was another example. The countless Indian children, myself included, who were raised away from their people. Some of us make it back, and some of us don't. And they don't know who they are as a result. Relocation was another example. In the 50s, that's when the policies when termination policies were really implemented. All of these things, even that concept of the rainbow tribe and that idiocy, that was another thing. They attribute things to our ancestors that were never said. You hear people saying things like about Crazy Horse that he said that all 4 races shall pray around one tree. He never said that. The man hated white people, like literally. He really believed that they should have all been executed. And that's the thing. They use.
I disagree, brother. Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't mean to do that, brother. But Tashunka Wicco did not have hatred in his heart that way. He never wanted to go to war, brother. He wrote about not going to war. He didn't like going to war. He had no hate for the Washichu. I mean, the Washichu came upon us.
His vision was a war vision from the
it's war and hatred is completely different, brother. And look, I first of all don't want to take up much time. I mean, we have our Mesoamerican Southern Indigenous brothers here, and they allowed us to come on this program. I don't want to take up too much of their space. I want to be respectful because I love their community. But I completely disagree with this narrative that he hated Washichus. Like, he hated certain Washichus, absolutely. But he was no murderous rat. He didn't hate women and children. He didn't hate their communities. He just wanted them to go away. That's what it is. So this false narrative that the Shunka Weko, but it's bad medicine. It's Pajuta Shicha to say that he said that he hated everybody, because this is a Eurocentric narrative of Lakota people that we were warring savages. We hated the white. No, we wanted peace. We wanted peace. While Lakota is peaceful values, brother. You know this, right? So when we talk about these narratives, it's important for us to understand that we have to break Eurocentric narratives when it comes to our own people. And part of that is understanding that our leaders just wanted peace. They wanted understanding. They wanted autonomy and sovereignty. So I'm sorry to take away space from my brothers and sisters here.
No worries.
And I apologize for, I think that this is something, unfortunately, what just happened here with this little exchange is a very common thing in Lakota country. There are 2 schools of thought, both of which were just kind of expressed here. But I honestly think it's a good thing, because people see that in spite of the fact that we have 2 differing worldviews, or 2 different perceptions, at the end of the day, you're still a Sichangu, I'm still an Oglala, and at the end of the day, we still stand under those 7 council fires and ultimately have the same goal in mind.
Juan.
Yeah, I mean, we don't all think exactly 100% the same. I mean, but we can still have a good debate. We can still have our differences and be respectful. That's really good to showcase here.
Of course, we're all indigenous peoples. We're all, as much as we like to say we're very communalist, we're also individual peoples. We all have our different perspectives, and even within nations, there are divisions, there are differences. But one thing I wanted to add was going southern example with Tupac Amaru II, normally called Tupac Amaru because he's the more famous one of the 2. And he's named after the last Inca emperor, or the last Inca king, the first Inca king was Tupac Amaru I, who was held up in the Inca fortress at Vilcabamba, and it was a second or dual government that tried to resist the Spanish occupied government that was now in Cusco and Lima. But the second one, during his wars in the late 1700s, in 1780, he actually did not. He actually united white criollos, Black Africans, and different indigenous and mestizo peoples. But he was intelligent about it. He didn't just say we're gonna sing kumbaya and harmony during the war. What his whole purpose was, it was both strategic, and it was both helpful. It was both helpful and legitimizing to have a multiracial coalition. One example would be there at multiple times his army would capture white spies, criollos that were working for the Spanish government, for the Spanish crown, and they would be given a decision. And there were points where they would interrogate them, and sometimes torture them for information, like like a government would during war. But at certain points, many of these criollos had a choice. They knew they would die, or they knew some other ghastly punishment would be done. So many of them joined the war. Many of them joined Tupac Amaru's side, and Tupac Amaru considered himself a new Inca, that he would recreate Incan civilization and take Peru back as an Incan nation. So these criollos were not. Maybe they were. Some of them. Maybe they were. They viewed that fondly, or some of them viewed it as strategic. They didn't want to die, so they became traitors. Either way, it was helpful for the Inca and Quechua Aymara cause in Peru to join, because they gave valuable information, because they could be used as spies and etc. In terms of African slaves, Tupac Amaru viewed the African slave trade as horrific, but he also knew he had to combat it strategically. So at certain point, there was a mass campaign that his army had done, where they had offered freedom for any slave that would be that joined the army. This was the same thing that Simon Bolivar did. Even though he's more colonial, he was the one who actually gave independence to South America. You were a slave, become a runaway slave and join the army. You'll be free if you fight for independence. Tupac Amaru did the same tactic 40 years before, and he did it with the purpose of destroying the colonial economy of Lima. For people who don't know, for non-Peruvians, and I study a lot of Peru since it's a sister nation of Bolivia, Lima is the capital established by Francisco Pizarro himself in 1535 as a coastal capital that would be connected to that would be the main port for Spanish colonizers to enter Peru. And it's still one of the most conservative and like racist cities in South America. It continues with that legacy. But in the 1700s, the point was to destroy the city's economy was dependent on slavery, on African plantations and slave labor. So Tupac Amaru wanted to liberate it because he viewed it as abhorrent, but also he wanted to destroy the economy of the colonial capital in Peru. You can see how both of those happen at the same time. It's not just about being kumbaya and having ideals. It's about being pragmatic and strategic about how you go about it, so that you can kill two birds with one stone, as the wise Europeans love to say. And it is true. We have to be strategic about how we do it. And in a discussion about how we deal with colonial institutions, I think it's the same way. We need to be strategic about how we do it. We can't just say, oh, we can't vote. That's a colonial system. Sometimes white folks are in division amongst themselves. Sometimes the U.S. is in a division amongst itself. And we can use those to help our own cause. Like if Bernie Sanders had won, it would have allowed certain green economic policies to have happened, which would have eased certain dependence on fossil fuels and the like, which would have made it somewhat easier for Native activists to go on, and it would have been to succeed, and it would have been a more strategic government. Franklin Delano Roosevelt did the Indian New Deal in 1934. Some of these policies help, but they're not decolonization. I don't want anyone to think that voting will lead to decolonization. What I'm saying is there are strategic points at every moment that we can use to solve indigenous problems. That doesn't mean being tied to the Democratic or Republican Party. In Peru and Bolivia, they'll say, you're not with Pizarro or Almagro. Almagro was his brother. You're not on either of those sides. You're indigenous. But you can use the two to play off each other, the same way we could use the Democrats and Republicans to play off each other for our own goals. It's all about being strategic. And in a time like ours, it's not time to be an idealist. It's a time to be strategic, cooperative amongst ourselves, and know when which fights we have to do and which hills we want to die on. And those should be very few, honestly.
Thank you for that, Brother Amauta. I wanted to bring in or introduce Phoenix. Thank you, Phoenix, for coming on. You came on a little bit earlier, and I know we're all doing our fair share of talking, so just wanted to say hey. And then I think
hey, yeah, I had some security issues using the laptop and this stream that you have, so I can use it on the phone but not on my computer. Got kicked out by myself a couple of times. Good to be here. I'm just listening at this point.
no problem.
I do that a lot.
It's all right. Those technical issues always happen every now and then. And then we have Mr. Claude. How's it going?
What's up? How y'all
Thanks for
doing?
coming. Good, good. And then we have a special guest, Cemor. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm locked out of my apartment.
Oh.
But okay, never mind. I'm back in. Okay.
It's the colonist's fault.
It is. But yeah, I'm just here to learn as much as possible. I feel like I'm sort of new to this. Let me turn on the light here. You know, I'm Mexican American, and for us, we really don't talk about race as much as I think we should. So yeah, I think it's important to have these discussions to figure out exactly what where we stand, where we're going, what progress we need to accomplish. But yeah, my name's Christian. Christian, how's it going, everybody?
Good. Do you have any thoughts you want to add on from what you've heard already?
You know, I got here really late, guys, but no, not really, not yet. But I will.
If you have something, maybe in a few minutes or so, please, let us know. But there will be other people, I think, that might want to come on. So probably within the next 10 minutes or so, we'll ask to switch you out with someone else who might want to come on. That's cool. Awesome. No problem. But yeah, everything that you said was just completely true. Because I read about Pizarro and Diego
Almagro, yeah.
Almagro. Yes, and it's just insane to me how they talk about, and I brought this up with another friend of mine who's also from Peru, who's from Peru like me, and in a news article they had said that they were talking about the election and everything, and how Lima is they call it a white city, but it's not a white city, because I've been there, and if you go there, it is mostly like indigenous people. I mean, obviously there are like a lot of Spanish descendants, there. There's some there, but I think to call it anything else but an indigenous looking city would be kind of silly to me. And that goes back to the Civil War and just how many indigenous people were fighting for Spain. It's insane to me. Like it really is crazy. And they made up the majority of the war that were fighting for Spain against the independence movements. They really don't say that in history. I just assume they're all mostly Spanish European people.
It's similar in the U.S. too. Like you'll have the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois nation. Different nations sided with the U.S. and others with the British, and for different reasons. Sometimes you keep the devil rather than the devil you don't know. That's a common one too. Sometimes you just have better negotiations and you're worried that the colonists will take more of your land rather than the British. On some levels that's true, but also both were colonial powers, or both are colonial powers.
Neo-Clashkatecas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we are already into an hour and 20 and we only got through like the second topic.
Which is great. For bringing in 8 people, Marcus.
Yeah,
It's all your fault.
Come on.
Originally, Marcus said it was going to be like 2 or 3 people on here, and then it blew up to fucking 10. So
he's like, it's an intimate setting. He says it's an intimate setting.
Marcus got excited. This is the first slide ever, so he's like, "Everyone, get on here, everybody."
Oh yeah, I think Phoenix wanted to say something. If you want to finish up, Marcus.
Oh sure, no, Phoenix, please, by all means. But thank you.
Hey, so I wanted to talk about something, but first off, my name is Phoenix. I'm a White Mountain and Mescalero Apache. We come from Arizona and New Mexico. And that's my general introduction right there. I wanted to talk about my experience in the Middle East, in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region, with the people, because some of the topics that were brought up by Stitlali and such was about the genocide and how people view us as stagnant or something. So one of the rhetorics that you will meet in the Middle East is about the from the Palestinian people or people who are just in general out in the Middle East about that. And so when you talk to them about colonialism, colonization, genocide, they will very easily say that they're undergoing a genocide right now in Palestine. But when you talk to them about Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, they will say, no. You guys it's done with. You guys just need to get over it. Now, I speak Arabic, so it's not like I'm misunderstanding them. They're very clearly stating that we just need to get over it. It's been a long time. That's what they say. And they say it's not the same. You guys, they say, khalas, the Americans took over, the Europeans, the Americans, they just took over. It's done. You should just get over it. You guys are Americans now. And when you tell them, no, these things are going on, we still have, Oak Flat, we still have Standing Rock, we have all of these pipelines, all of these protests, a lot of things going on. You show them pictures. And, you can show them pictures of the military vehicles and the weapons and whatnot. And they blink and they say, yeah, but it was a long time ago, right? So why are you still fighting? And then I will say, well, why are you still fighting then? And then it gets them it kind of gives them a little mind fuck, really, because it's like, huh? It's like, well, why are you still fighting? So why are you still asking us? Why are we still fighting? I said, how long will you fight for Palestine? They will say, oh, we will fight forever and ever. We will never stop. And I'll say, okay, so why do you tell us that we need to stop? And then when you have the conversation with them about, for example, Mexicans, because a lot of people, a lot of them do marry Mexicans. Have a lot of Middle Easterners out in the Middle East. They marry Mexicans and bring them to Middle East and whatnot. And a lot of them will look like me, very Indian looking. They look like a lot of us on the panel, And they say, no. They're Spanish. They're Spanish. It's different. They're Spanish now. So then there's that. They make restaurants and decorate the walls with multicolored, psychedelic images of Sitting Bull and Geronimo. And, they actually do have a restaurant like that, by the way. You're laughing, LakotaGuy, but they really do. And it has, on the menu, you look at the menu, it says Apache fries, Wild West burger, fucking, it says that. And it's like, you know what you're doing, right? I told them, I said, okay, that is insulting. I said, how would you feel if somebody opens a restaurant and calls it, the Palestinian, and then had Gaza burger and, occupation fries, how would you like that? Then they were like, no, why would they do that? And I'll say, so why are you doing that? And it'll still go in a circle. You can feed it to them, it'll go in a circle. But what also gets me is the language with which they refer to us. Half of the people will refer to us as Red Indians, Hanud al-Hamr, and the other half of the people will refer to us as Zinuj al-Hamr, Red Niggers. They literally call us Red Niggers. And I can't tell you when I meet somebody, it's a 50-50 really, if they're going to call me a Red Nigger or if they're going to call me a Red Indian. It's a 50-50. And then when you tell them, why do you call us niggers? And they say, because you're the Zinuj. Everybody knows you're Zinuj, you're niggers. Everybody knows this. And then I say, but you don't even call Jewish people Zinuj. So why do you call us Zinuj? You don't call them niggers. Why are you calling us niggers? And they say, because you're niggers, you're Zinuj. So what, I don't get it. And then I'll say, will you call a white American the Zanuj of America? Will you call a black American the Zanuj of America? They will say, no, they're not Zanuj. And then I'll say, okay.
Oh yeah,
Then
Phoenix.
I'll say, will
If you cannot say the N word, just so this video doesn't get demonetized or like flagged for.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was explaining about the
Yeah,
language.
but
You know how I'm
still, I
using
don't
it.
want this conversation is too important to be lost because someone maybe not doesn't understand the context or flags it because it is a pretty big fighting word. No worries.
So that's what they call us. And then they get angry with me because I tell them, don't call me that. And then I say, will you call someone from Africa this word? And they will say, yes, because they're Zanuj. And I will say, okay, wait. So you call us Zanuj, you call Africans Zanuj, but you don't call anybody else from America Zanuj. You don't call Jewish people Zanuj. Like, this is what you say. They say, yes. And I say, do you see what you just did there? Then I say, why do you say that? And they'll say, well, because that's what we were taught to call you. And I'll say, who taught you that? They said, I don't know, from a long time. And like, wow, this is 2021. They will still call you. They call us that. They call me that and get upset.
Is there an academic term that's used that's more respectful in Arabic?
Well, some people they just say Red Indian, or they say no, they say American Indian, they say Red Indian. Very few will say Amerikin Asliin, which means original Americans. But that's very few. I've never actually met somebody who is either an academic or otherwise to say Amerikin Asliin. Nobody says that. They say Hanud al-Hamr, Red Indians, or they say Hanud Amerikin, the American Indians, or they'll say Zanuj al-Hamr, and I already explained what that means.
Yeah.
And I mean, they just do, and they will argue with you. But Mexicans are Spaniards, they say they're Arabs, they're cousins of the Arabs now, because Spanish are cousins of Arabs. So, so they're our cousins now. And the culture is almost the same. So it's okay for us to marry their women. And that's how they do that. So it's actually pretty frustrating if you actually move around, the Middle East, and you're trying to have these conversations with people who they do understand colonialism. They have these words for it in their language, but like when they know what genocide is, they know what colonialism is, but when you try to talk to them about it in the Indigenous American context, they don't know. It's like there's a big disconnect. Like it's not happening.
What country is this again, or is it just in the Middle East?
It's been throughout the Middle East, yeah.
So it's
all kinds. I've met all kinds of people. It's been, if I name the different countries that I've met these people from, it's all kinds of Middle Eastern countries.
Oh yes, Cemor, did you want to say anything? Did you want to interject?
You know what? When I was growing up, my dad used to say that we were actually Middle Eastern. That we came from like a Lebanese colony over in Mexico. And so for the longest time, that's what I assumed. And I felt like a connection to that. And then I did a DNA test, and they, practically zero. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I feel like, yeah, for Mexicans, there is sort of a connection there. They came over a while back. And so there's a ton of Middle Easterners in Mexico. And so I would say, yeah, there is some sort of relationship that ties us to them in a way. Like, for example, I don't know if any of you watch soccer, but Miguel Layun on the Mexican national team is Lebanese. And so you have these players on the Mexican national team, and you can see them. I remember in the 2014 World Cup, you could see his family in Lebanon celebrating his goals during the Mexican national team games. So, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, there's a lot of huge Arab immigration into Latin America. The same in like Argentina. Actually, Argentina had a policy of trying to welcome European immigration because this was the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they had believed in social Darwinism, that there were certain races that were superior to others, and their belief was that if they brought in white Europeans, specifically the ones from like the Nordic countries or like Germany and England, the ones that they considered the more industrious ones, not the lazy Southern Europeans like the Spanish, the Italians, these like really terrible like terms and divisions that they've had for different European groups. they had hoped that by basically importing and subsidizing European immigration, they could quote better the race. And this was state policy up until I believe the 20s or maybe even up to the 40s. So there was a process of literal whitening the population. There's a similar one with settler colonialism and the settler colonialism in the US of bringing in more white Europeans and then having the Homestead Act of saying Europeans move into the West, move out west, so you can have cheap lands, colonize the West, and also fight off the Indians for us. So there is always that process. So there is somewhat of that process of whitening the country that exists both in Argentina, the U.S., being the same in both Spanish and English. But yes, Lebanese folks, many of them were considered white actually when they came in, and many of them, and that's actually why there's tacos al pastor, because it comes from, I believe it comes from like Arabic dishes. So there are connections, and there is a complicated history of like there's like good food, and there are people who, many of them integrated into Mexican culture, but there's also the political use of that immigration to like whiten the country. To finish off the Argentina comment, most of the immigrants that came were actually from Southern Europe and light-skinned Arabs. So the policy that Argentina wanted failed. They got the bad whites, quote unquote. But
that policy still exists, because isn't Alberto Fernandez said that Argentinians came on ships? You remember that comment he made recently?
I don't think it's policy, but it's definitely I don't think it's policy, but I think it's still definitely ingrained in the mindset of Argentines. And many indigenous Argentinians were like, that ship, that's not gonna fly. That's the ship we're gonna.
He said Mexicans are Indio, right? In Argentina, they came on ships.
Yeah.
What's he talking about?
He was like the Indians are in Mexico. In Brazil, you have you have like the forests and the natives, and then in Argentina, you have the whites from the ships. And it was just so tone deaf. It was so racist in a country like, especially at a time when like just a year ago, Bolivia had a coup against them. Argentina, they had Mauricio Macri. He's the president before Fernandez. And he wanted to actually build a wall to stop immigration from Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay because they considered them too Indian to enter in. So like, and then there was a similar one between the the Dominican Republic, and Haiti, where I think the Dominican Republic wanted to build a wall with Haiti. So there's always that dream of wanting to whiten the country or darken it less. But like, there are dozens of indigenous nations. You have the Koyas, you have the Diaguitas, you have the Quechuas, you have the Mapuches, you have the Telhuelches, and you have many indigenous immigrants in Buenos Aires from across the Americas. For one of the comments that I saw like pop up, but yes, there's a dark history, and for many of the Arab folks, it's a sad fact. It's a sad reality that's what's happening with discourse in the indigenous discourse in the Middle East. I would hope there would have been more solidarity.
I'd like to address a comment that somebody posted on the YouTube. It says, people from across the water care less about natives. Most of those people think we're extinct. Let those people go on over there with their own thing. My response to that is this. The people from the Middle East are immigrating to different countries. They're going to Europe, they're going to all across the Americas and Canada. And they're taking this harmful mindset about us with them. And so the reason why I'm concerned with the globalization of our genocide. I'm concerned with the globalization, the normalization globally of our genocide like this. And so when it is a cause of concern to know that people from these countries who are heavily by the thousands immigrating to Europe and Canada and the US and what else, they're taking this with them. You know, they're calling us these things, and they go to, what does that mean when they see us as what I explained? They literally, you can put it in Google Translate, it'll say what it means. This is how they see us. And then they come to the US, they go to Canada, they learn English, they go to school, but how does that language affect how they see us when they come to our lands? They see us in the same way. So it's still a it's like it is a cause for concern, and something that I think, at least for myself, I should continue at least to address when I do speak with Middle Eastern people, either in the Americas or overseas or wherever, because they, like I said, they're taking that mindset with them, and thus they're also teaching it to their children, and then they will teach that to their grandchildren and perpetuate it. It's a globalization, global normalization of our genocide. And so that's my answer to that person right there, saying leave them, leave them with how they are. That's just how they are. Like, forget about them. They're on the other side of the world. They're not staying on the other side of the world.
You have a unique into Arabic culture and like pan-Arabic culture, and I think you have the possibility of trying to help push the more respectful term, the one where it's, I think, Americanized, like the one where it's original American in Arabic. I think you can in Arabic. Like, I think you should. It's because none of us have that. None of us have that unless one of y'all is like a polylinguist. Like, you should use that word more, and you should definitely popularize it in Arabic, or try to do so as much. But Marcus, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, it's really strange how, like, the government, says who can be white and who cannot be. Like, we're talking about Lebanese people coming over to the United States, not United States, so some countries in Central and South America to, whiten the population. But in certain Western countries, Middle Eastern people aren't considered white. In the United States, they are. They weren't forever. And in the 1940s, I think 50s, maybe Irish and Italian people weren't even considered white. So it's like,
Well, Phoenix, I got a question for you. So I've seen a lot of Middle Easterners here in the U.S. Well, they want their own ethnic category, like called MENA, because they don't consider themselves white. How do people in the Middle East itself? You're at the source. Do they consider themselves to be white people?
They call themselves white. So that's my answer on that. They do call themselves white in Arabic as well. And they do discriminate against their own people, by color. And they do hold white, light-skinned people at the top. And I can't say that it is something that was brought from the Europeans when they came to the Middle East, because it's something that they've done for a very long time, where they thought that, being light is something to strive for, or even for beauty standards, or for respectability. So in their language out here, they do say discriminatory things about your color to each other and to other ethnic groups out here. They'll depending on who I'm talking to, they'll, if they call me black, because their use of the color terms is not the same as in the US. When they say white and black, it's not synonymous with European or African. It's literally about your skin tone. So they could call all of us sitting on this panel right now, from what I'm seeing from your images, they would call all of us black. But there are some Arabs who are darker than us who would call us white. So their use of the color terms is totally different. But as far as like identifying as white people, as in Europeans, no, they don't identify as Europeans. They know they're not Europeans, but they do like whiteness. They do like being light. They like their women. They like their men. They like everybody being lighter. It's something that they find more respectable, and that does influence how they treat each other and treat people who live in the Middle East.
Interesting, because a lot of the Middle East was colonized by Europe. But anyway, I wanted to, and thanks for your points, Phoenix. I wanted to move on to the current issues affecting indigenous tribes throughout the Americas. The purpose for this channel, for Juan Chaloa and I, was to start bring some sort of movement to help bring justice to those tribes that are facing either genocide, loss of land, so many issues right now. Having more people aware that those in tribes and us south of the U.S. border are not so different. Yes, there are cultural differences, yes, but I wanted to talk about like maybe some issues, maybe regarding the recent school, the boarding schools, where there's, I believe, what there were 200.
I think it's up to 1,000 now after Kamloops. There are, I think, up to
1,050.
over
Yep.
How many?
1,050.
Wow. And that's only a couple of schools.
That's only 3 schools. Yep, 3.
Wait, what happened?
Horrific.
On the real quick, on the boarding school / residential school topic, while it's definitely a good thing that people are starting to see this, and I'm saying this as a lower 48 native, a lot of people are kind of doing this thing where they're thinking that it was a Canadian thing. And it's like, we do know Carlisle happened, right? Like Carlisle Indian School, that was a thing. Holy Rosary on my reservation was a thing. My mom went to Holy Rosary, actually. There was literally a guy just a few weeks ago was saying how Father Edwards, that due to the fact that I don't want you demonetized, I will not vocalize exactly what I think of that man. But someone had died, and they were told to dig a grave for this kid, and the guy's shovel hit something, and he pulled up his shovel, and it was the skull of a little baby. That was on this reservation. You ask most people, their grandparents went to boarding school. Lydia Whirlwind Soldier spoke about it a lot. And she said something. She said, if you hear me speak on here about my childhood, you would swear I had a good childhood. But that's because I speak of the times when I was able to be home with my relatives. That was 3 months out of the year for 12 years until she graduated. It's the left-hand dressing family. That was their original name, but if you hear them now, their name is Phelps, because this Washichu general at the school said to left-hand dressing, the original left-hand dressing, he said, you're a good Indian. You're civilized, you speak English, and you're Christian, so you're no longer going to carry the name left-hand dressing, you're going to carry the name Phelps. My Ina Carol Iron Rope, may she rest in peace, the woman who made me her son after my bio mom died, she was telling me that when some of the Takojas were born, the grandparents, full-blood people, said, oh, look, they're healthy and fat and light-complected. You see people around and they'll have blotches of white on their skin because they try to literally scrub the brown off their skin.
That's horrific.
It literally, a man by the name of Dick Wilson once made a comment, the only way for us to survive basically is to assimilate, to be like white people, quote, crazy horse is dead, the old ways are gone. And that's why there's a lot of the dark versus light stuff going on here. So many people are ashamed to speak their language. Some physically can't. They will literally, go into it, have anxiety issues when they hear it. The boarding school / residential school issue, I don't know how many of you guys live on reservations.
I live in the city.
Countryside.
Yeah.
If you just go around and talk to the older ones, they'll tell you. You know, my grandma, she was beaten by this nun for not answering her Washichu name. Well, the idiot woman didn't realize that Unchi didn't speak English. Another nun was talking to a young Dakota woman, and she answered her, but in Dakota. And she says, now, we don't speak gobbledygook, we speak English. There was a Dakota nun who knew my friend's auntie who would tell in detail in Dakota exactly what she would do to those kids because she was a Dakota nun. And that's why when I heard about that nun who got trapped under that wall in Oglala when that storm came through and hailstones pounded her face in, I took pride in that because at least the Wakia are striking back against what's happening to us.
I think this brings up a really good point, brother. We could talk about all these atrocities of genocide. There was over 10,000 boarding schools in just the lower 48. And we found over 1,050 dead bodies in just three boarding schools. Imagine what's going to happen when they come down here. So, what I want to center myself on solutions, because I think Indigenous conversations often get tied up in going over what happened to us, right? And we could talk about that from time immemorial, right? That's what it is. But consider this is that there's a law in a lot of northern indigenous treaties. The 1867 Fort Laramie Treaty was one of them. It was called the bad man among the whites clause, and that was in our treaty. It was also in the Navajo, Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Northern Arapaho, Shoshone, Bannock, and Apache. So it was kind of a pan issue, and these are treaties. These are Article 6, Section 2, supreme laws of the land. And it basically states that if a white person or a non-Indian commits a crime against an Indian on Indian territory, aka reservations, where
we
the
have to
majority
hand them over to the whites for
the boarding schools took place. We were supposed to report them to the Indian agent, and then they would go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington City, and they proceed to cause the offender to be arrested, and then there would be reimbursement for injuries sustained. And people think this is antiquity. Treaties. That's just antiquity. It's with the old Westerns. No, in fact, in 2012, it was argued with the Ninth Circuit Court that I think her name was Deborah Whirlwind Horse. She was an Oglala Lakota tribal member, and she was killed by a drunken white guy just cruising on the road, and they were walking home, and they got killed, and they successfully argued in the Ninth District Court of the bad man clause. So they actually settled out of court for reimbursement among them actually getting prosecuted. So let's talk about solutions, right? We're talking about boarding schools. We're talking about atrocities. Let's reenact the bad man clause among the whites clause, because that literally has been upheld in the court. And that's something that we can take to prosecute not only these musical chairs that the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican played with, pedo priests, and that's exactly, they come in there, they do something, they get prosecuted, they leave and go to another place, right? But we can hold these people responsible, and more importantly, we got to hit the money bag. And I'm sorry if I offend any Roman Catholics here. I think they're pieces of shit myself, just for the atrocities they committed. But they also, think about this: when Notre Dame, when the roof, went aflame, They raise $10 billion in a week. I mean, think about that. Think of that political capital these people have, So when I consider, oh, wow, the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican is this money bag, let's use and litigate ourselves with a lot of these treaty rights that have been upheld in the Constitution and take them for all their goddamn worth. I think that's the way forward, man.
I think so too. I think we need to go farther, though. I think we need to, aside from the expansion of legal rights within tribes and between tribes in the U.S., I think we also need to talk about what constitutes education. What do we want to do when it comes to education, especially after COVID, since we're losing a lot of indigenous language speakers, language keepers, elders who speak languages that are. I know it's wrong to say they're endangered, but there are few speakers, and those are these elders are valuable resources to build vocabularies, to build communication, to share, to continue knowledge from time immemorial, and those become lost once certain older community members die. I think one thing we have to consider is in Latin America, alongside plurinationalidad, alongside pluri or multinationality, what's considered many nations within one nation, or many nations under one state, many indigenous nations, different African and mestizo nations within one country. We also need to consider how that results in education. There's the discussion called interculturalidad or interculturality, which is kind of a strange way to say it, but in essence, it's different as education is as we recognize different indigenous nations within a country. There's also the recognition that these indigenous peoples are disenfranchised by the very fact of them. In Latin America, this is most of the case, that they speak, in many cases, only indigenous languages. They don't have access to English. But also, if we're to consolidate proper and authentic nationhood across Latin America, many indigenous activists say it's not enough to, quote, educate indigenous peoples to speak Spanish. It's also a process that has to go the other way. Non-indigenous peoples, no matter what their ethnicity, have to learn indigenous languages themselves to properly engage with the country. As in, here, let's say in the case of Bolivia, Evo Morales, the Aymara president, and I don't like when people say Evo. That's a pronunciation that just does not ring well to the ear. Evo Morales was the Aymara president who was overthrown in 2019, but in 2012 he had passed a law saying that had obligated state officials to learn an indigenous language based on their region. So the difference between this and maybe other policies is that there's no one official indigenous language. Like in Mexico, there could have been the language could have been Nahuatl, and it could have been the classical Nahuatl that the Aztecs spoke. Or in Guatemala, it could just be one Mayan language. Or in Peru, it could just be Quechua. The difference with Bolivia was that each region had their own specific indigenous language that the residents who were in there had to learn. So if you were in Cochabamba, which is a predominantly Quechua-speaking region, you would learn Quechua. If you went to La Paz, which is predominantly Aymara, you would learn Aymara. There's a Quechua pocket in the north, and you might have to learn Quechua there, even though the majority of the region is Aymara. You went to the eastern side, the Amazonian side, you would have to learn one of many indigenous, one or maybe another Amazonian language, Mojeño, Guarani, etc. I think in the US and Canada, there could be a similar implemented policy that people living near or in reservations and different school districts should teach and should develop curriculum in multiple languages, in English and in the language of the reservation or of that region. So in the Dakotas, you probably have to learn Lakota. In if you're in Oklahoma, depending on which school district you're in and their proximity to maybe to which reservation, you might have to learn Muskogee or Cherokee. And I'm sure there would be much conflict because there could be those like people who are like pretendians. Oh, like I now speak like Cherokee because I had to learn it in school. Now I'm Cherokee too. I think the process there is just to revitalize the language and make it a living one, make it and also to indigenize the country, not in the sense of everyone is indigenous now, but rather make it a living language that becomes a language of commerce and a language of culture across different regions. But I think it's important to keep English and Spanish, and it's a little bit controversial, but I think it's important to keep English and Spanish because if I only knew Quechua, I couldn't communicate with my friends, families, and like friends and family, and like no, not family, but friends and like allies in like Colombia or Mexico or even in the U.S. or Canada. And I think it's
I'd
valuable.
like to say something on this topic, if I can, at the moment. So, on the subject of education, so this is something that I talk about often. And you're right, there is an example that I use often when I talk to, you know, I don't want to call them bigwigs or whatever, but people from different universities and whatnot. And the example I use is the example of the state of Hawaii. In the state of Hawaii, in the early 90s, they started something called the Hawaiian Studies Program. And statewide, across the state of Hawaii, they made it a requirement that for all schools, including private schools, you must take Hawaiian studies. And when you take Hawaiian studies, it starts at kindergarten and it goes all the way up to high school. And when you start it, the basic Hawaiian studies they start in kindergarten, they start out with simple sounds and simple words. And it doesn't matter if somebody is Hawaiian, indigenous Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli or not. It's a requirement in all public schools. So they teach them things starting out from the kindergarten with basic language, songs, basic stories. They they take them on field trips, all of this stuff is taught in the public schools with a indigenous kupuna or grandparent, grandfather, grandmother, and the community is who chooses the educators. And as you progress throughout elementary to middle school and high school, you start learning other things that include like what is colonialism, what is sovereignty. They teach this in Hawaiian studies. And they also teach, again, they teach more Hawaiian words, more Hawaiian culture. They teach about general aspects of Hawaiian spirituality that they're able to teach in a public setting. And it does happen where you have, especially a lot of the children or the military family members who live in Hawaii, they get all angry and butthurt and they'd be like, my kid shouldn't have to learn all this shit because, they're not going to do anything with it. And why do they have to learn this and blah, blah, blah. And the state will give them the same answer, which is it's a statewide requirement. And that's that. If your kid doesn't want to take that class, they're going to fail their grade. And that's it. We've had students fail, flunk 7th grade or 8th grade or whatnot because they refuse to do their Hawaiian studies homework. And so when I talk with stateside indigenous educators and stuff, when I'm in these kind of circles and I'm trying to do exactly what you're talking about, just encourage people to at least from a state level, try to get their state to do just that, which is for every school district. There's every school district, there's different tribes that territory belongs to. So I say, you should make it a state requirement that indigenous studies is something that they have to learn, and that for every school district, talk to the nation that's their territory and let them choose one of their people to be the educators for these districts and whatnot. So we do have these conversations. They are at the moment kind of not going anywhere because they're more concerned with other things I'm not going to talk about right here. But yes, this is a conversation that is coming up, has come up, and the state of Hawaii is doing it. And the other thing, there's some positive things that have come about it that we can see from the state of Hawaii, which is there is a normalization of certain ceremonies happening in public. For example, you can watch regular everyday news in Hawaii, and they'll be like, "Oh, there's a new welfare office opening up in, I don't know, XYZ city, and a ceremony will be held, at 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday," or something like that. And they do it. They do it, and they bring some of their kahuna out to do the ceremony, and that's that. and they cut the ribbon and whatever. They report on it like as if they're reporting on the morning traffic, really. So it's become sort of normalized in certain ways. Now Hawaii is still having a lot of problems, but these are good things that are, I think, have come from, you know, the requirement of the public school system having Hawaiian studies. So if this, we see it's successful in its way in Hawaii, so it should be, as you said, successful throughout, you know, US, Canada, even south of the border. It should be.
I think
certain. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, just quickly. I think it should be done from a nation to nation point of view. It shouldn't, because like there are multiple nations in different states sometimes. Yeah, go ahead, LakotaGuy.
Yeah. This is just what I was gonna say. I think this is great. This is like, I dig this vibe, because this is something we've been talking about in our little Indigenous circle, and it's great to have, you know, a pan-Indigenous discussion on this thing. It's like, dang, we're all thinking the same thing, kind of, you know. But the issue, man, is that it's easier to implement this, and I know this is geography, this is history, all this stuff, but it's easier to implement this in you know, South American countries, even in Hawaii, because you literally have a monolithic nation, or you have more sedentary nations that didn't really do a lot of moving, you know. And people look at, you know, the lower 48 map, and they're trying to indigenize the map. The problem you run into is that you have a post-colonial map and you have a pre-colonial map, and then you have little maps in between there, because people often don't know that there was a mini ice age when genocide happened, because of the amount of deaths that happened in the lower 48. Also, climate change was a big factor among indigenous tribes in the 1500s, moving out west with the buffalo herd. So when we think about, you know, indigenizing our schools, K through 12 education, it's way more complex in the lower 48, because we have to think about, are we honoring you know, pre-colonial indigenous nations that, you know, have a right to this land? You know, are we honoring post-colonial nations? Are they speaking for them? You know, for instance, you brought up a good example, the Cherokee, you know, EDC or CN, Cherokee Nation itself in Oklahoma, as well as the Blackfeet and Chickasaw Nation in that land. Oklahoma is actually Osage land before any of that, right? So when we think about, you know, Western expansion, you know, Cherokee Nation maybe should be taught in Georgia, should be taught in you know, in those type of areas where they were, you know, ancestrally from, because they're Eastern Woodland tribes. You know, the Haudenosaunee Five Nation Confederacy, Iroquois Confederacy, they were sedentary, so they stayed in their area. But you look at the Lakota, the Ocheleshakoan, and we actually moved out from the Obex, or the Outer Banks area, with the buffalo herd all the way back to our ancestral territory before moving back to the Black Hills. So I dig the idea of us, you know, getting involved in K through 12 education. But again, settler colonialism always puts up a wall. I mean, you look at CRT, critical race theory, currently being talked about in K through 12 education, and there's so much misinformation about that. But it would take such little effort. And, you know, we are ready to go, brothers and sisters, and saying, hey, you know, the Sichango Nation is ready to talk to these K through 12 educators in these schools and get involved in the school district and say, hey, you want to learn Lakota? Here's an after school program. Here's an online program. Here's this type of program. But the problem is that language reclamation has really been damaging when it comes to genocide, so that we are literally losing fluent language speakers every day. So, you know, we have to reclaim it for ourselves. And then on our reservation, we have Sintaglishka University, which is Spotted Tails University. And that university actually has a master's degree program, finally. And that's within the last 10 years. That's how far behind we are in the lower 48. So I really would like to see a push in it. But I think we have to honor, you know, those in ancestral land territories and post-colonial land territories. And that's just a lot of webs to figure out. But again, having that nation to nation, you know, dialogue with each other and saying, hey, you know, if the Cherokee wants to teach Cherokee Teshlagi in Georgia, feel free, because that's your ancestral territory.
Yeah. You know, the way I see it is like, you know, I grew up out in North Carolina. I'm originally from New Jersey, but when I was growing up in North Carolina, I remember in school, they taught you so much about the history of the state, North Carolina. That was very important. You had to know the North Carolina anthems and all these things. But the only thing we learned about the indigenous people was what happened after all the colonials arrived. So it's like, the way I see it is, if we're going to be learning about this area of land that we live in, we should know the full history before all the white people arrived. So whoever lived in this land. Like if you live in a particular region where whoever lived there, you should absolutely know the history of who lived there first. You should know their language, all of that. Because if you're gonna force us to learn about this area that we live in, we should know the full story, not just the one-sided story.
You know, we're dealing with, you know, settler colonial history that believes that chocolate came from, you know, baby Jesus, right? It didn't come from indigenous food science, right? So I mean, we are so far behind. You know, you say, hey, indigenous people, you know, the food science came up with, you know, corn and vanilla. No way. We all, you know, we had that. How about the pineapple? Oh, you know, so they don't want to hear any of that stuff, right? So we're battling this refusal to be educated too. I mean, that's why we have the Make America Great Again for just white people movement happening right now.
Wanted to say real quick.
Oh, before we go ahead, I like for anyone who wants to know about the ones in like Latin America, I recommend this book, New World of Indigenous Resistance. It's an anthology that was compiled by two anthropologists here. I don't know if you can see it, Lois Mayer and Benjamin Maldonado Alvarado, and it's different indigenous activists from North, Central, and South America discussing Noam Chomsky's ideas of education through an indigenous perspective. So I think that'd be an amazing thing. And this was one of the key texts that actually taught me about Latin American indigenous movements. And it was written in 2010, so it's relatively recent. And I recommend all Native activists from like North and South America read it. It's a cheap book. And it's the one, and I read this when I was like, I must have been 15 or 16. It's not super hard. There are technical terms, but it's by people who are either popular teachers who work with their own community. So they're not all academics, but it's an amazing resource.
What was the book called again?
New World of Indigenous Resistance. There we go.
So somebody in the YouTube made a comment and deleted it, something about funding for schools and teachers and whatnot. So I wanted to say really quick, because that's something I did write about for the master's in education was I did highlight about how the Hawaiians did it in Hawaii. And what I want to say is that when they first started with the Hawaiian Studies program in this, you know, from the state, it was unfunded. The state did not pay not one of the Hawaiian kupuna, none of the Hawaiian teachers that were actually teaching in all of the schools for years. They didn't pay them at all. So they were completely teaching all of these, you know, classes every day for all of these students across all of these grades across the state, and they were not getting paid, but they still taught anyway because they were dedicated to, well, this has got to happen. And at the same time, they kept on petitioning to become paid by the government. So eventually the government started to, you know, the state government started to authorize part-time pay for these full-time teachers. So eventually, after I want to say like 8 years, they did start getting paid part-time. And now we're in the 2020s, they are being paid full-time. So it took a couple decades, but it did start out completely unfunded. And that's just what they worked with. And it sucks. And it sucks. It's insulting. It's completely colonial at its core. But they were just dedicated at making this happen, even without being paid. So I do have to say, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually a state decided to copy Hawaii with this and say to the nations in the different districts, hey, you know, teach the kids in your district and whatnot, but we're not going to pay none of your teachers. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that. I mean, I saw it happen. We saw it happen in Hawaii. But I mean, if you stick with it and people petition and whatnot, they will eventually get paid. So that sucks, and it has happened already. That's my to this K Watson who deleted their thingy about funding.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about all of these discussions as like on all of its levels, as a school board level, on the school board level, as a level between teachers and the principals and the school department and the school districts, the level between the state and their school, the state and like the school boards and each individual school and educational policy, the federal government and it's maybe even mandating that like these programs be funded, subsidizing these programs so that they're actually viable and that they're able to like have the resources to pay to pay teachers and even like create new like materials. Like we need to talk about this on every level possible. And I think we also need to recognize that all of these politics, we can have control and we can have influence over all of these institutions. We just have to organize ourselves better. And we have to not discount when one person tries to move at one level because, this is too, you're separating yourself from the people. Like I'm an activist. You're not allowed to, you shouldn't be running for office because like, it's a colonial institution. I think those remove the potential that we have like as the present moment stands of how power is divided within the country and how power is divided within our own education system. And I like the message that Marcus and Juan Cholo were mentioning, that this is about debate. It's not about discounting or like removing people just because they have a different opinion. And I think going off of that, we need to consider all of these strategies and all of these and all of our tactics to be all of them as viable. If one person tries to work on the federal level while other people are working on the state or even municipal level, we need to support each and every one of those efforts, but they should be coordinated and work amongst each other so that we can have a proper so we can actually have proper education systems that will teach indigenous languages, but also won't try to destroy them at the very small level of we're not going to pay these teachers, so then they might quit and then these programs might fall apart. All of those are important. All of those levels.
I have to go now, so it was good sitting with you. It was good visiting with all of you.
Thank you for
being here.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you.
You know, brother, sorry, go ahead. Anyone wants to go before me? I've been talking too much.
You're good. I was just going to introduce Moore real quick. Thank you, Moore, for coming on.
Is he frozen or is he just serious? Oh, he's gone.
No,
That's what.
Maybe he lost connection or something.
He was just sitting there.
He was just sitting there serious. I was like, wow.
Deer in headlights, man. I don't know.
He was frozen. LakotaGuy, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I struggle with that because I was really politically active, in the settler colonial system with, I'll start with Carrie Edwards. I served in the United States Navy. I got out and I was like, I really want to make a change for my people, and they're like, well, George W. Bush, weapons of mass destruction. I mean, that's a slam dunk, right? Who's going to lose that election? And, then they had John Kerry, so, I got politically active there. I got politically active in my Senate, and this is my struggle with it, is that I understand that we should give time, labor, and resources to those that want to run for office in settler colonial governments. I completely dig that. We need representation. You look at Deborah Haaland, Secretary of Interior. That's a big deal. But at the same time, I think, unfortunately, we have given too much time and effort towards just settler colonial activism. And I think that we have to make a good balance, a healthy balance of that, because the biggest interference with our progression sometimes is toxic allyship of the white community. And what I mean by that is that we have our white community that sits there and literally tries to talk for us. They think they know all about our issues, and they get elected. They want to say, I know the plight of the Indian, right? And this goes against, this is a historic issue. You look at FDR, regarded as, a New Deal guy, implemented micro-socialism, which we all can love. We all enjoy the social safety nets. But at the same time, the 1934 Indian Organization Act implemented constitutional, colonial governments in in tribes, over 574 federally recognized tribes. So now that we have a oppressive institution run by Indians on Indian country, is that progress or is that not progress? And then we think about, the dissolution of many tribes based on self-determination in 1974, them determining, you're not Indian enough with blood quantum, or you're a lineal descent. And then we have, American Indians making too much, money in casinos. So you got these rogue IRA, 1934 constitutional governments literally disenrolling Indian people because they want to, keep, and they want a bigger per cap. So again, I'm all for getting indigenous people, indigenous voices in settler colonial government politics, but at the same time, it's a balancing act. We have to healthily balance that in organic activism.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we also need to recognize how like the different local levels can be much more influenced. I mean, a lot of tribal relations are on the state level rather than on the federal level, except for like certain recognition and like certain like subsidies that the government might give. But I think in many cases, most of the schools that like indigenous peoples go to are controlled on the state level because of the school boards and because of like state laws on education. I think we shouldn't just focus on the federal level. I think in many cases, it's a flawed path. I think there can be some goals that are like worthy there. I mean, Deb Haaland. I mean, even like someone like Mark Charles, who I don't agree with 100%, but I think he was able to bring out somewhat of the message of indigenous. Like we need to change indigenous policy on the federal level and do it with an indigenous candidate. Mind you, I don't support him 100%, but I think goals like that are honorable. But I think where we have more control is on the local and state levels, and I think we should definitely focus on those more, but also have on the side the activist community, legal staff, just like putting pressure on like a very real level of, hey, sometimes certain activist politicians like in the state might need our help. Let's help them. When they don't, we'll just take it away. And I think I remember, I think in Arizona, like Joe Biden was actually elected actually past the threshold, I think, of winning Arizona because of the native nations that went Democrat. That doesn't mean we should go Democrat. It means native peoples have the power to decide whether the state goes Democrat or Republican. And we're neither Democrats nor Republicans. What we need to know is that we need to use each one. We need to see the candidate, and we need to know who we can push further to help indigenous causes. Hell, even the case that recently in Oklahoma, the one that was which had the opinion written by Merrick Garland. LakotaGuy, do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's the repatriation of land that went to the Supreme Court. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. It was the one that recently passed, I think like last year or the year before that. It was the one in Oklahoma that like expanded legal jurisdiction in Oklahoma.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That included Tulsa. Tulsa's now on Indian land. Tulsa's now on Indian land. Is that crazy?
Could you imagine major cities just becoming like Indian land, res land? That's amazing.
Hell yeah. You know, and it's only then they start talking about jurisdictional mazes, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, let's, because now white people are affected, right?
But but one interesting thing that I heard was there were native leaders that actually supported Merrick Garland, even though he was a Trump pick and he's very conservative because of his stance on Indian policy, which surprisingly is sometimes better on the conservative side than it is on the more quote liberal side. And I think we need to dig through the mud of like, it's not Democrat or Republican. It's about which person can push Indian policy forward. And I think when we see something like Arizona, hell, if there's a Republican that's able to push Indian policy forward and like, I don't know, funds unions or something, then like, yeah, push them forward. If there's a Democrat who does that better with like the social safety net, with like green energy, push that person forward. But indigenous peoples have the control. We just need to organize our peoples better, like when they vote, and also organize them better when they're not voting, to be part of like to put pressure on both politicians and on like the activist grassroots level.
Yeah, I think my fear with that, brother, is like, on the national level, exactly what you said. Like, it's less involved unless you're like someone like Deborah Haaland and you get to a cabinet position. But someone like Sharice Davis, which is literally a token Indian at this point, I mean, does nothing for Indian country, doesn't speak out, doesn't get involved. That's the African American community suffers from tokenism in politics, and that's my fear with Indian country too. Is that we're going to have a lot of that coming forward. Like, just because they're Native American doesn't mean they're going to be good for Indian country. We've seen that time and time again. You look at the 3 affiliated tribes in northern North Dakota. They're all about oil pipelines. They're all about oil subsidies, and it's funny because
different chiefs in like chief and council.
Yep, exactly. And it's because guess what? They're getting per cap. They're getting money from these oil companies. So this idea that we're a political monolith needs to be completely, disseminated, because on the local level, you can make change, like join your school board, those type of things, more than like something like a state senator or something like that. So, it's visibility, and it's also finding who, specific issues that you can partner with. I mean, look at Trump. As awful as Trump was, he made it 574 with Little Shell Band of Ojibwe, and he signed the MMIW Take Action Plan, which united a lot of the IT part of MMIW. So, give or take, right? Like I don't like both parties, but I will allow and I will stand towards people who promote Indigenous issues.
It's about putting pressure than supporting a party or even a candidate. I mean, in Bolivia, we had our first Indigenous vice president back in 1996. his name was Victor Hugo Cárdenas. He was an Aymara activist and actually started one of the was a major figure in an Aymara political movement known as Catarismo, named after Tupac Katari, who was like the Tupac Amaru of Bolivia. At the same time too, but also he was one of the founders, and he had actually worked with Evo Morales back in his activist days in the 90s. But then he became the vice president, and he became a token Indian for González Sánchez de Lozada, who was a neoliberal. He was like a typical neoliberal in Bolivian president. He was educated in the U.S. He believed in like privatizing lands and opening up and just not recognizing indigenous rights. And that's the same problem. And that's the same problem across the Americas. It doesn't matter if it's English or Spanish. And that's what I want to push forward. It's like the struggles that happen in Latin America are similar ones to the ones that happen in the U.S., regardless of the language. And they're the same tactics that are being used even now. I mean, when you have a vice president, the first Indigenous vice president, who was literally a stand-in and could not change policy for the most part, many people just disregarded him, both in the activist community and in the political sphere he was in. People in the Congress didn't heed his words. The president knew that he was just there as as social capital for him to be like, look, I'm very progressive. I'm very indigenous. I'm very pro-indigenous. So we have to also be careful about that too, because. But someone like Deborah Holland, who's opening up, I was worried that she was actually going to be a token Indian. But she's opening up investigations for murdered and missing Indigenous women, which I think, at the very least, is a first step forward, and it's an important one too.
Yeah, I think it's also to recognize there's a big difference between South American Indigenous pressure and the availability in the political capital and the United States. You look at
in Bolivia.
Right, exactly. you look at the availability of the mascots, right, like the Redskins and all this stuff. We have literally been protesting that for decades upon decades. That is, unfortunately, and I'm humble enough to say this, we just didn't have the political capital enough all those years to actually get something done. But in the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of all these things, political activism and a rise to getting on the streets and protest. What did it was not was part of our activism. I'm not going to diss that at all, but more importantly was putting pressure on sponsors of the NFL, sponsors of the Redskins, say, hey, if you support this, we're not going to support you. So strategic applied pressure, even if you don't have that much political capital as we do in South America as Indigenous people, if you do it the right way, good outcomes will happen. But it seems like it takes 10 years for us to get an inch, when South America, it takes them 2 weeks to get, 10 feet.
Yes. But I think we can do this with the example of acupuncture. You have to just hit the right point and you get a bigger result than if you just slap someone or pressure, just try to go for a wider area. It's about strategic and very precise pressure. But what was it that I was thinking about? Yeah, no, in South America, or I think that can be used in the US, is seeing the tactics that are being used, is seeing the results of what happens after you push certain policies. One thing that's very interesting for Northern Natives that should be known is that we had a thing called agrarian reform. The agrarian reform movements across Latin America were that indigenous and just non-indigenous peasants or farmers protested the fact that large businesses had control, large landowners controlled mass swaths of land across Latin America to the point of owning like whole communities, and that indigenous peoples could be sold between these like landowners for because of like the laws that were in place. But then after like different nationalist or progressive like left nationalist or progressive governments came in, this land was redistributed back to indigenous peoples. Like it was literally land back, but in Bolivia it was like 1954 or 1953. In Peru it was 1969. In Ecuador it was like 1964. In Chile it was like 1970 or 71. In Mexico you had I think the largest and earliest one, which was like technically in 1918 in the Constitution, but like 1936. Someone correct me if I'm wrong there, with Lázaro Cárdenas, the president of Mexico, and he's seen as like the head of the Mexican, the culmination of the Mexican revolutionaries, like institutionalized policies. But the whole point is that once the land was redistributed back, but it depended on how and how far the governments would go, because it broke up the entire feudal economy of like there are landowners who controlled wide swaths of land. They choose when it's developed on. Many of the governments push for a more individualist and liberal-minded view of the land, as in indigenous peoples. Yeah, you'll have the land, but it'll be divided amongst small families. So it's not the communal one that you had prior to colonization. It's one that fits better within the international world market. You get to work more productively so that the nation state goes forward. But it goes against your own cultural, communal ways of being with the land. And even then, much of this land was still bought up by corporations, or there wasn't enough subsidies for these organizations. Let's use the example of Peru. In 1969, the left military general Juan Velasco Alvarado went into deposed the president, who was seen as a progressive, but he was like weak, and then instituted a land reform, gave back millions of acres of land back to indigenous peoples. It was seen as a massive progressive victory for indigenous peoples. And it was even led by indigenous movements and supported by indigenous leaders. However, much of it was done from the top-down level. It was done by well-meaning progressive bureaucrats who wanted to implement policy more than they wanted to discuss the matter with indigenous peoples, which meant even when there were different communal cooperatives developed for each individual community, there wasn't enough funding, there wasn't enough discussion between indigenous peoples and the government, and many indigenous people still didn't have the equipment to actually go beyond, in many cases, just sustenance farming, just farming for their own communities. And even then, they didn't have enough proper access to the economy. So a lot of it stagnated, and then a lot of it got bought up by mining companies or by different corporations who just wanted to own valuable land. So in a world where let's say honor the treaties happens, or land back does happen somehow, it's not a question of just land back. It's a question of who does the land back, who's able to, how much negotiation is happening between different levels, between the government and each tribe, or is it going to be funded, or is it going to be just like reservation land? Like, here's land, it's not productive at all. You could probably raise 3 sheep, and that's about it across 40 acres, and then they're just waiting for you to fail. But that's a big point.
Yeah, I mean, we have landowners. They're called ConAgra. Like the big farmer, right? I mean,
yeah.
Big Agra.
We have mining companies across Latin America. Just right. It's crazy. They're U.S. and Canadian companies. So you have just U.S. Canadian imperialism in Honduras,
yeah,
Peru, Ecuador, etc.
So we're talking about land back, right? And I think there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of in the weeds. And I really appreciate this opportunity, Marcus, because like we don't have this conversation. And, you know, people on social media are talking about, you know, beadwork and moccasins. They're not talking about repatriation, right? Yeah. And part of it is understanding, you know, how we got to this point. You know, the 1877 Land Allotment Act separated and definitely, you know, divided all of Indian territory to 160 acres per Indian. And what we lost millions of acres because the remainder, so say a tribe had 400 members, right? And they had 160 acres per, but they had way more land with their treaty land, right? They had way more land. So the rest of that land was given to what? To the land to settlers. And the biggest welfare program and the biggest beneficiary of welfare among anyone in the United States was those that had the Homestead Act and took advantage of the Homestead Act, because the Homestead Act was literally stolen indigenous land given for free to white settlers that would settle land for 5 years. And after 5 years, it's free. You settle for 5 years and it's in your deed. When we talk about repatriation of land back, we also have to talk about how we have to get away from domestic dependence of the United States. How do we get away from federal trust responsibility? And part of that is, you know, applying for UN membership and putting pressure on the UN to actually have us become autonomous. And the only way to have autonomy and having land, look, land back doesn't matter if we get land back and it's under federal trust, because that means, look, I have acreage and land. You know, I got 120 acres. I can't do much on farming of it. I can't sell it. I can't put like a store on there. I can't do anything. I can't monetize it. I can't accumulate generational wealth. And this was a intentional thing that the United States wanted to do to indigenous people, say, hey, let's not have them accumulate generational wealth. They knew the Homestead Act would accumulate generational wealth for for white people, and therefore a tax base, a permanent tax base, which does what? Increases the spending of and the growth of this settler colonial government. So the idea of the Indian having land needs to be outside the the domestic dependent relationship we have with the government. And part of that is understanding, okay, if we're getting land back, you know, are we going back to our traditional ways of government and upending the IRA era of our government system as well? And I'm a big fan of that. I say, hell yeah, let's go back to our traditional ways of government, because if we get a large swath of land, that means we could do things like set up LTE systems that are private, that bring internet to all tribal members, which increase public education, which increase things like virtual doctor visits, which is a big issue in Indian country. Also, it talks about, the idea of accumulating wealth, having things like hydroelectronic facilities, having energy facilities that we can contract out to rural farmers, and they pay, the tribe, the use of this and we could be competitive. And, you want to talk about capitalistic market, we can go in the face of these regulatory, power grid systems and all of these internet systems that have just made $1 billion off of indigenous people. Say, hey, we got a competing company that's on Rosebud or something, and we'll give you 1 gigabit per second for $20, while Comcast is screwing you with like $150 a month.
Yeah. That'd be amazing. And I mean, like, you can even one of my ideas was just like renting out like wide swaths of like unused land to green energy companies who are like putting out solar panels or wind, or like wind turbine towers. Like, even those are just small examples compared to the ones that you set up. Like those, imagine if you can control, like, you can be competitive in a place like Oklahoma, where like Tulsa, like different parts of Tulsa are buying from indigenous companies, getting access from the indigenous company right next door, rather than maybe like Comcast or like Verizon. Those are strategic ways to use capitalism. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to capitalism, and when it's done strategically, and also with the very fact that like the native economy is like decades back from like, and just even like most rural economies too. But that's incredible.
I think also, we do this among our people. We are our worst enemy sometimes. We pigeonhole ourselves with Indian gaming. Indian gaming is only successful if you're around a metropolitan area, or an area that allows, people to visit you. If you're in a rural area, good luck with your little dinky casino. No one's going to go over there and play blackjack in the middle of goddamn nowhere. So when we think about, indigenizing our land in full autonomy, that means creating actual wealth, building, businesses and nonprofits and all these other things that we can do. I mean, you think about, all the things that affect Indian country, poor health outcomes, poor, law enforcement, justice outcomes, poor educational outcomes. I mean, you put in their businesses that are thriving, you get back the nuclear family and have people be mothers and fathers again and have housing and applicable water. Most of Indian country doesn't have water. They don't have, electricity. So when we think about, solar grids, maybe creating a industrial solar industrial complex that is building solar panels specifically for indigenous communities at a cost level, so that these communities get it at cost, build it, and then give back, maybe a percentage after they're successful.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it.
I
mean, in Bolivia, one quick thing, Marcus. In Bolivia, like a similar thing, you had the government, Evo Morales' government, subsidizing transportation. Like when we talk about indigenous peoples, we think, oh yeah, they're just gonna go to farming. Like if they don't think we're gonna go back to like hunting and gathering, they're just gonna think we're gonna like herd sheep and be farmers. No, in Bolivia you have the government supporting, cooperating with China to develop like computers. You had Bolivia buying, I think, Russian models of different cable cars, either cable cars or like light rail cars for Cochabamba City, the Quechua-speaking capital, that Cochabamba. You have the cable cars or the overhead cable cars working within mountainous terrain, because a train or a bus system kind of works, but a train system is almost impossible on like really hilly terrain. So you had the government build like overhead cable cars, and now it's the main transport system for a lot of Bolivians. You have electric cars being developed across Bolivia. You have different mining. You have mining cooperation. Of course, there's criticisms of like lithium mining because of how water exhaustive it is and how dangerous it is to the environment. But also, it puts Bolivia on the as a major player within the green economy. Elon Musk himself said, when he was asked, why are you supporting the coup in Bolivia? Is it maybe because like you're gonna benefit if if the US has control over that lithium and then allows you, Tesla, to like just ransack Bolivia for your electric cars? And he just said, deal with it in a tweet. It's a famous tweet amongst like Bolivians and like activists. After he lost, there was a funny tweet that came out afterwards where he said, we might need to look beyond lithium for the future economy. And I'm like, it's because you lost the geopolitical game, my guy.
Right.
Cool. Bolivia shows an example of how an indigenous president and an indigenous future can be, that doesn't deny 21st century technology and doesn't deny cooperating on an international level with China, with Germany, with Russia, etc. It's not about being one or the other. It's about knowing how to play the international game for our own benefit.
One of the big things I want to see us do in Lakota country, and this is just a selfish idea, is that when we go to full autonomy, full sovereignty, I want us to be able to go to, the border towns and ICE agencies and basically deport these people to our reservations so that they're able to have housing, public schools, education, and increase their education and repatriate them and give them dignity and give them a place that's safe for them to live and strive as a family, so that we can literally upend this idea of, capitalistic societies literally upending, Central South American countries and funding all this terrorism. And, who's the person that has the biggest toll? It's indigenous communities. So if we can, go to complete autonomy, import, definitely deport all these people to our reservations where we can teach them skills. They can use the skills they already have, build tiny houses, build solar panels, build schools, public education. Then they go back to their countries armed with a little bit of wealth, man. That's some life-changing things right there.
It's a massive labor force. That would be economically successful, and it would destroy like private prisons that are like funding ICE. Mm-hmm. Like it'd be an amazing idea, and it's also an inter-indigenous political move. That's amazing.
Yeah. LakotaGuy, that hits home for me because I was here illegally for 15 years, man. So just the fact that you even consider such an idea is it's really heartwarming, to say the least. Yeah, and I think that, I bet you the American government would try to fight that in court. But in my opinion, the Lakota or the indigenous tribe would win that, because who's the American government to say you can't have a Mexican citizen go onto the Lakota reservation, right? You have your own sovereignty; it's your own land. So who the fuck is ICE to say you can't do that?
And that needs to be a fight with honor to treaties. Once the land is returned, once treaty rights at the very least are recognized on a federal level, rather than just kind of being on paper, then those negotiations could happen. But that's what we need to put forward first.
Right, because and I've heard this said before by indigenous people, where a tribe is basically a nation, right? A nation has its own immigration policy, so you can't tell the Lakota tribe or this other tribe you can't import these people. You can't have them immigrate. That's just a breach of their sovereignty.
Yeah.
But what are they going to do when we achieve full autonomy and we're deporting people to our reservation, and we're giving them housing, public education, schools, and we're taking even just goofy things like DACA. Do we really? I mean, come on, man. We're in 2021. Most of your fruit labor, all this labor equity comes from these undocumented communities that you're literally ripping off. And they file taxes. They never get tax returns. I mean, all this equity that the United States is getting, let us indigenous communities take that equity and let us repatriate them and actually give them some dignity and honor and exactly, building wealth for themselves. The whole idea of the settler colonial government is wealth creation and wealth building. And that happens generation after generation, and we haven't had access to that. We never had access to that. That's why, land back is not just about land. It's about, us having a seat at the table on not only the UN, but having wealth creation. And more than that, stability and peace. No indigenous person should be hungry. No indigenous person should not go without housing. If we have autonomous governments in the United States and, little nations that we can, basically bring people to.
I did want to share an idea with you guys, and it may be a little bit different from the topic, but I personally am of the belief that being Native American doesn't have to be a narrow, having zero European genes or zero European DNA. So with that in mind, I actually wanted to add that one difference between Northern and South American indigenous communities is that in South American countries such as Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, many indigenous native communities are the majority in the country, and they hold political positions such as governors and even presidents. But the difference between South and North American native people is that, for example, in Peru, many native people with minimal European DNA, they don't consider themselves as being native or indigenous. So native populations that are in political powers, such as Minister of Education, they don't work with the set of mind that people in places such as in the Amazon being indigenous, but not them. So they don't identify themselves with the people that need help. And that leads to poor educational curriculum and separations between a group of native population in one country, I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah. It makes sense. And I mean, that's why it's important to have a president like Pedro Castillo. Pedro Castillo, he's the socialist. He's the agrarian socialist who was elected in Peru. Am I freezing?
Yeah, it's very important to have him as a president. However, a lot of his ideas are very undeveloped. And I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to articulate that sort of issue that's been going on since colonial times, but he's doing it in the way that he can, which is being a teacher. But the issue that he's trying to articulate through these very drastic sort of ideas that he has, but I'm not sure if it's very well developed for the country to go that route so drastically. He would say, I'm shutting down this institution and I'm shutting down this other institution, but nothing really guarantees that when you reopen another institution in its place, the institution will do the job correctly and morally and do it the right way, as opposed to the way that is going on now, which is usually led by corruption. So even though he's a really good, native or indigenous person, I think his ideas are not as developed as they could be.
I wouldn't say that. I think what was it? He might need some work on how to actually govern on certain levels, but what was it? Because he does come from the union side, from the syndicalist side of Peruvian politics. But a lot of, if you look at the policy program for Peru Libre that was written by Vladimir Cerrón, a lot of the policies aren't actually that radical. They're policies that were implemented across Latin America in countries like Ecuador and Bolivia. I think one of the scare tactics used in Peru was that, all of the policies that Pedro Castillo wants to push forward. He's not indigenous. He's a campesino. He's like he doesn't speak an indigenous language, and he's a peasant or like a farmer, but he's close enough to indigenous for most people to be scared. And he also has some solidarity with indigenous peoples. But the policies that the Peru Libre policy manual has are like, we're going to redistribute wealth from higher taxing and regulation of mining companies. We're going to change the constitution and to be a plurinational state. Bolivia did that. Chile is doing that. Bolivia is one of the leaders in nationalizing industries and using the profits from those companies, from those industries, to redistribute back to pay for social programs, like paying old people Social Security, or for students to have some money so that they don't go hungry when they go out to school, or even like subsidizing other key industries like medicine or like transportation. Other policies you have are like raising education. I don't think it should be as high as he put it, but I think prioritizing education, and what I've heard also is prioritizing the semiconductor policy, semiconductor industry in Peru, like the ones in Taiwan and in China. Those would be amazing for Peru. It would make it a world leader in technological development, in computer technology, and it would put it on league with major Asian countries. And also because of the because of the mines in Peru and Bolivia, mainly in Bolivia, they could actually develop a lot of major technology for major green technology and major like modern computer technology. I don't think Pedro Castillo is a radical president. I think he's radical for Peruvian politics, but he's not a radical. He's not a radical at all. Most of his policies are actually necessary reform. And if you look at Bolivia, not Venezuela, Venezuela is the scare tactic they use to be like, oh, he's so radical, he's going to destroy the economy.
I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of him.
And Castillo compare themselves to Ecuador and Bolivia, not Venezuela.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with, but there's a lot of but you can't really trust the news either. But there's a lot of news on Cerrón and his political party, in his previous delinquent ways of funding his party. But yeah, I'm not too adept familiar with everything that you've said and everything that Peru Libre stands for. But the stuff that I've seen, I mean, when he says communism and shutting down institutions, and the whole mining thing, it's like a lot of those things the Congress can do, and it has happened in the past, but they just haven't done it, in a rigorous way that assures the benefit of the population. They just usually do it in a corrupt way. So it sounds like he's saying new ideas, like he's saying some oh my God, eye-opening sort of ways of doing things, but they have been done previously, but they have been done in a corrupt way, so they never usually work. And he's trying to propose a new constitution, which I personally, it's just my opinion, I personally think it needs a lot more. It needs to be developed a lot more to be able to integrate not only the native population in Lima, but also all of the Amazon, all of the native people in the Amazon, in the peaks of the Andes. So how can you construct a government that includes everyone to play a part in it, not just the Lima population? But that's just my opinion.
You should look up what was it, Veronica Mendoza's manual de ideario política for the party Juntos por el Perú, Together for Peru, where she lays out and her party lays out how a new constitution would work and how that new constitution would deal with recognizing indigenous nations for the 2021 presidential campaign. She didn't win, of course, but she negotiated with Pedro Castillo, and I'm sure many of those ideas show a development of how Pedro Castillo would do it. And I mean, what was it? And it would be a good model too. So I don't think it's underdeveloped. I think there are already developments within Peruvian politics that need to be recognized. And I think Peru's politics and media are just so conservative, and so there a lot of it's just like Fox News, like Willax, or
I think RP
those
RP
are
something is very
it rots the
Foxy.
brain compared
Right.
to have like proper political conversations.
Yeah, I mean, bringing in everybody else, like from Lakota and also native people in Mexico. I mean, if Peru, for example, is trying to build a new constitution, like Veronica Mendoza, who's trying to include everybody in the political system, it should be exemplary enough and important enough to be able to replicate that, because there are a lot of people in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in Mexico. There are a lot of people in people generations from the Aztecs and the Mayans, and so if it could be exemplary enough to be able to copy that sort of and include in other countries like in Nicaragua and Guatemala, in Ecuador. There are a lot of, even in Bolivia, in here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cemor. Ladies and gentlemen, More. Sorry to introduce you. And then I just want to introduce Millie really quick.
Hi, Millie.
Had anything you wanted to chime in on?
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I'm in England, so it's really early, but it's so nice to. I think I've listened to a few of you guys speak with Marcus. So everything's completely different here. So I'm learning lots. I'm Peruvian, as you know, but it's nice to hear from the American perspective. We don't really have kind of conversations over here in the UK because obviously our history is different, and so it's just so great to hear you and to meet you. I think I spoke with More. Is it More? What's More? What? I'm sorry.
It's Morley, but you can call me More for short.
Okay. Oh well, it'd be good to kind of communicate with you later on. And and New Amauta. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Sorry.
Yes, it's New Amauta.
Okay, it's so nice to hear from you. I saw your video with Marcus, and we have really interesting insights. And LakotaGuy, I'm afraid I'm very ignorant about the Native American history, etc. But you've really shined on a lot of new insights and perspectives. Thank you.
Hey, how are you? Hey, how are you? It's a joke. It's a joke. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, thank you so much, Millie. That was pretty funny. but we did want to keep this under 3 hours, so I think we're just gonna have some final words. If someone would like to go first, maybe say anything. If not, then I will start.
I'll just throw in something. So the reason why me and Marcus started this channel again for all of you guys is because we want our people to realize that they're indigenous, all the mestizos, all the mixed people. Because once you have that realization, you have a surge in power, and we can come together and we can get things done, right? For the northern natives here and for all the indigenous people back home. So my whole purpose, my whole mission is to have everybody realize they're indigenous and bring that power forward, and then people like yourselves, all you intellectuals like New Amauta, LakotaGuy, you guys then take that power and do what you want to do with it. But my purpose here, at least on this channel, is to get everybody to give you guys that power, right? Basically, is to go back to their roots.
First decree of New Amauta: land back.
Land back. Thank you. Anyone else want to give any final words?
I would say let's broaden the idea of who is considered to be indigenous. You don't have to be 0% European. You can be 50-50 and still be indigenous, and still be native. For example, Barack Obama, he's half white, but you don't say, mulatto. You say he's black. It's the same thing. I have a little bit of from my mom's side, but I still consider myself very indigenous, very native, and I think that should also be the case for everybody.
No, absolutely agree with you. I belong to an indigenous community, the Guachicol. They're still around in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. A lot of them are very indigenous, but I'm only half. I'm 50%, but I'm part of their community. They accepted me in. So yeah, I'm completely on board with that. My argument has always been, if you are close to half or half, it shouldn't be a debate. You're native. That it shouldn't be a question. It shouldn't be a fight. Now, if people have asked me where do I draw the line, I don't feel comfortable telling people where I draw the line, but I do always bring up, and I hope this don't offend you, LakotaGuy, but I do bring up the fact that a lot of northern native tribes require 25%. I'm like, so, I mean, I don't think that's like too outrageous to say if you have 1/4 that you could claim that, but, you know, my main argument is if you're close to half, then you should be good.
Juan, or I know Cemor, I forgot your actual name, but do you guys want anything?
I can go.
Sure.
Someone mentioned a while back that we should be united by food and agriculture, and I thought that was a really cool idea because, again, there's so many other tribes, so many different languages, and sometimes it's hard to try and bring us all together. But I mean, all of us can understand the importance of corn or the importance of chocolate, and I think those are accomplishments that I think we should all be proud of, that we can all join together and say, hey, we did this, and we could do more, more than that. I also wanted to talk about potentially talking about, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the new Black Panther movie that's coming out, but I think one of the antagonists is supposedly going to be a Mayan character, and so they're going to work on the idea of Atlantis and making it the lost civilization of Atlantis, making it a Mayan civilization. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but a lot of people say that the Mayans just left their cities all of a sudden and no one really knows what happened to them. So I don't know if you guys had anything planned regarding that, but that'd be a good discussion to have on that. What else? I had something else, guys, but I can't remember right now. So
it's all good. It's late.
Yeah.
I'll check that out though. Juan, are you gonna say something?
Oh no, I'll check that out though for sure.
Oh, sorry, I was talking about Juan Sierra. My bad.
Oh, both have the same name, man, dude. It gets confusing, bro.
You're good.
Blame the Spanish for that shit.
There's one too many.
I know.
One more.
The bloody Spaniards, bro.
Can't you tell? I'm 100% Spaniard. That's a joke from the South.
You got the Spaniard right here, bro. That's where it's at.
Oh yes, you see how blonde it is.
Man, I straight up look like a conquistador, guys.
Yeah,
straight up look like
that's Ordaz, right? Ordaz,
Yeah.
Millie, do you have any final words?
I guess I would say just be more community oriented and just lend a hand whenever you need. Just lend a hand whenever you need to.
Thank you. Good. Millie, did you want to say anything else?
You mean regarding the DNA thing?
The DNA?
I was
just talking about any final words. We're about to wrap up.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay. Well, yeah, my final words, we make this podcast, for people that want to watch, to inform others, realizing who they are. There's a lot of people out there that are, suffering, and our job is to, open your eyes more, because the mainstream media isn't doing it. The current direction, I believe, for a lot of, indigenous people that are waking up right now in Central and South America, I don't personally I think the direction could change, because I want to help those that, as I said, are in need and need our help. So by coming together, helping one another, I think there's a good future ahead. And I think this podcast and having the great people on here, along with the audience, are really good steps forward. So with that being said, we are at 3 hours.
I just wanted to say real close. I wanted to thank you first for allowing me in this space as a Northern Native. And I think we need to start including each other in these type of spaces, and, we're all warrior societies, from Governado all the way up to Crazy Horse, we're all part of that warrior society here, and we all have to talk about these things. And I think it's more important than anything is that I want people to think about this, is that we have to start centering our activism in Indigenous activism. We can't stand behind other or, be a part of other, not only political movements, but oppressed societies and say that they're going to, put Indigenous people in the forefront. We got to center ourselves in Indigenous activism and lead those Indigenous movements. No one's going to do it for us. No one gives a crap about Indigenous people besides us. No one's going to care more about our issues than what we're doing. That's why we need to have these conversations. We need to unite both North and South. And this idea of like who is or who isn't Indigenous, man, we're all thicker than a Snicker. Let's all just unite together and get back our land. That's what's going to be effective for our kids in the future, man.
Yeah. Nice insight. Thank you.
To wrap up myself, thank you for coming on, LakotaGuy, and thank you for everyone here. We need to have more of these international Indigenous discussions. Like what I've noticed is that there is that disconnect between North and South. One of my major influences was the eagle and the myth of the eagle and the condor and the quetzal, because we are seeing it right now. This whole discussion is proof that that's happening at this moment. Back in 1977, when the International Indigenous Treaty Council went to Geneva, that was brand new. And now these types of discussions are happening just in my own bedroom. We don't even have to get on a plane to do these. This is an example of how this myth is happening right now before our eyes. And I'm really glad I got to talk with you, LakotaGuy, because I think our histories in South America and across Latin America provide a roadmap for examples of what has worked, what doesn't work, and what can you do? What can you guys do to not fall into the errors that we've had? What happened with our agrarian reform? What are our views of like plurinational states, of having multiple nations recognized under one state, as in one government? Having recognition done between mestizos, Métis, different like mixed Indigenous peoples. These are discussions that need to be had, and it was an absolute honor speaking with all of you. And it's just a shameless plug. Check out my Instagram page, New Amauta. It should be below. I do a lot of content where I just tell you about Indigenous figures you haven't heard about in their own words.
Well, actually, everybody on the panel, we can put your stuff in the description. Just spam Marcus with your links and stuff.
I got an OnlyFans. I mean, I got a TikTok. So go ahead and it's at LakotaGuy is my TikTok. So if you guys are interested, you could view me there.
Oh, LakotaGuy, do you want me to read that message you sent to me in Spanish?
It's up to you. It was just to introduce myself for those that may not know me. But if you want to go ahead and do that, you could do it or not. It's up to you.
All right, let me do it real quick. A toda mi familia que habla español en los diversos territorios, mi nombre en el idioma Lakota es Águila Replanguante. I always butcher Thunder. I'm sorry, bro. Soy ciudadano de la Rosebud, Sioux Nación de los Estados Unidos. Los saludo en todo corazón y con un caloroso cruzar de mano. Les quiero decir que mi corazón arde por justiciar, paz y soberanía por sus naciones. La profecía del Condor, Águila y Quetzal se cumplirá cuando nos unamos como solo pueblo. No importan las fronteras, no importan los idiomas de los opresores, colonizadores, y estoy firme con ustedes en todas sus luchas. Desde muy pequeño me enseñaron a que siempre apoyara a toda la gente indígena del norte, sur y Centroamérica. Yo marcho por los derechos de los inmigrantes en 2004 y también por el maltrato de los inmigrantes a manos de los agentes de la frontera y las leyes racistas en el 2008. Somos un pueblo por sangre y por espíritu. Nosotros no queremos a los opresores en nuestras tierras como dictadores. No los queremos y no los necesitamos. So that's a message from LakotaGuy in Spanish. So don't laugh at me, guys. My Spanish is, it's okay, right? But I grew up here too, so.
Yeah. But again, thank you all, members that are on the board right now. Thank you. Amauta, LakotaGuy, Juan Chiloa, Moore, Millie, Juan Sierra, and Cemor. To our guests, our non-native allies, we thank you so much for your support.
To the haters, we hate you too.
Yeah, too.
Like or dislike, it gives them more traffic.
There it is. Yeah.
Good point. It's good.
Yeah.
But hey,
It was an honor, brothers.
Thank you,
It was
brothers.
an honor. Wagesni. Panasni.
Goodbye, everyone, and good
Bye.
night.